Post-Dragonflight and first task, the Gryffindor common room is boisterous. Harry has defied everyone's expectations, including his own, and he did not die today. He has bested a nesting mother dragon in the shortest amount of time and tied himself for first place in the Triwizard Tournament that he wasn't supposed to compete in at all. Really, the Quad Wizard Tournament now. Harry and Ron catch up on all that they've missed in each other's lives over the last few months. Ron says, "Harry, I reckon you could win this whole tournament." But Harry assumes that that's just Ron trying to make up for his behavior over the last few months. Harry is 14 years old. Everyone else competing is 17 or 18. And let's be clear for a second. Harry, while technically an underdog in this tournament, is also the most famous person in the entire world. Hermione says, "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. If this was task number 1, things are bound to get harder." Speaking of which, all the Gryffindors in the common room that are currently celebrating Harry and their victory as it relates to the Gryffindor team of it all, the entire Gryffindor common room wants to hear what's inside the golden egg that Harry has just risked his life and successfully collected. What is the clue to the next task? So at their eager urging, he opens the egg, and from it comes this horrible, ear-splitting screeching, just sounds of wailing like a banshee. He closes it abruptly, all sense of urgency to solve the egg completely drained away. He's been re-embraced by his school, he's reunited with his best friend, he has 3 whole months to figure out what this egg clue might mean. His brain isn't even clocking that he's going to have to compete in the next task. Feels so far away. The Gryffindors party on, and Fred and George give Neville a canary custard cream after assuring him that they have not bewitched it, but they have, really non-consensual. And that canary custard cream turns him into a literal canary. It's all in good fun though, because he eventually molts back into himself. That is outrageous. If that happened to me at school, I would be so pissed. They use Neville as a sort of guinea pig marketing tool. Custard creams are 7 sickles apiece. They do no lasting damage, and they're now on sale. And lots of Gryffindors line up to buy them, and throughout the rest of the book, people are just bursting into bright yellow birds. December has arrived, and classes are dwindling down. The Slytherins and the Gryffindors, in care of magical creatures, are dealing with the last 10 surviving Scroots. They're really big now, and Hagrid has tasked them with trying to settle the Scroots in for winter because maybe they hibernate. So the students are supposed to be shoving them into boxes filled with pillows and nailing them shut. But turns out the Scroots don't hibernate, so they really don't take kindly to being enclosed like this. So it turns out to be a pretty futile task, with most of the kids fleeing to Hagrid's hut and many of the other kids getting kind of injured. To make matters worse, all the kids feel pretty lightheaded and dizzy because the surrounding area outside of Hagrid's cabin smells a lot like whiskey fumes, because he has just a trough of single malt whiskey for the enormous elephant-sized palominos. It's really not a good look as it relates to academic prestige and Hagrid's credentials, and unfortunately, Rita Skeeter happens to sidle up, happens to appear and bear witness to this challenging class. Hagrid says, "Didn't Dumbledore say you're banned from the grounds?" And she just ignores that. She inquires about the origins of the Scroots, and that seems to make Hagrid pretty uncomfortable, and the kids are like, "Shit." And she feigns an interest in zoology to get Hagrid to agree to a one-on-one interview with the 3 broomsticks. Harry, Ron, and Hermione already understand Skeeter to be a twister of half-truths. They've seen her defame Harry, they've seen her slander Arthur and Dumbledore. They worry for Hagrid's career because he's not always as on guard as he maybe should be, and they really hope that he didn't import the Scroots illegally. Turns out he bred them himself, which is so much worse, I will say. Ron isn't worried though, because he says Hagrid's been in loads of trouble before, and Dumbledore has never seemed inclined to fire him. Worst comes to worst, what, he'll have to get rid of the Scroots? Oh, did I say worst comes to worst? I meant best. Divination is the same as always, with Trelawney constantly predicting Harry's death. Harry says it feels significantly less bad now because he could laugh about it with Ron, and Trelawney has been wrong so many times before, it doesn't leave much of an impression. And he just survived the dragon task, and Trelawney implied quite heavily that he would not, so he's sort of whatever, she doesn't know what she's talking about. His attitude's up. The boys are leaving a pretty deserted library one evening. The only other person that had been in the library was Victor Crumb, and Ron spent loads of time in between the stacks trying to decide if he was going to get Crumb's autograph. If this is an ideal time. The boys leave the library and they run into a breathless Hermione. She urges them to follow her, and so they do so, and she takes them to the kitchens. That requires moving through the dining hall, going through this back room, and then tickling a pear to get through a portrait hole, which has led the fandom to create a euphemism around tickling the pear, which I will leave you to look up if you so choose. She takes them to the kitchens, despite much frustration on the boys' part. When they enter the kitchen, they're surprised to find that the house-elves' kitchen is ultimately an exact replica of the dining hall that is positioned above it, except with lots of kitchen supplies and the necessary accoutrement. The way that it works is the house-elves put food on the tables underneath the tables in the dining hall. The dishes come back down. It works as like a... never mind. All the house-elves are wearing tea towels with a Hogwarts crest embroidered on it. They're all tied like togas around their tiny bodies. They are greeted by Dobby, and it's such a surprise. They did not know that he works here now. He seems to be thriving in his newfound freedom. He loves to buy clothes, particularly socks. Currently, he is wearing a tea cozy on his head, and it has lots of different pins on it. And he's wearing a tie over his bare chest, and it has horseshoe pattern. He's also wearing children's sports shorts and 2 different mismatched socks. Dobby explains that he works at Hogwarts now. He said he traveled around for a while looking for a new position, but he couldn't find a family that was willing to pay him. Many doors were slammed in his face because the point of a house elf is to work for free. But Dobby says he likes being free, and he's not ready to give up his agency. Dobby offers the kids a cup of tea. Several house elves trot up to them with a tray of tea and biscuits, and it's always very abundant and wonderful, very much taken care of by the house elves. Dobby says Dumbledore gave Dobby and Winky both jobs. Dobby is paid 1 galleon a week and gets 1 day off a month. Hermione says that's not very much, and Dobby's like, oh no, I had to talk Dumbledore down to that. Initially, he wanted to pay me 10 galleons a week and give me weekends off, and that's far too much. Winky, during the entirety of this conversation, is wailing. When asked about her wages, she shouts that she may be a disgraced elf, but she's not so ashamed as to accept payment for her work. She is also in her own unique outfit, but unlike Dobby, her clothes aren't clean or taken care of. It's clear that she takes no pride in this new appearance. The clothes are like dirty and covered in soup stains and burns. Dobby says she's not adjusting well at all, and that she still thinks she's bound to Barty Crouch and has to keep his secrets. Dobby reminds her that she can speak her mind now. Dobby said it was Dumbledore that explained this to him, that he was free to say whatever he wanted about Dumbledore. And Harry says, well, you can say whatever you want about the Malfoys too. They're not in charge of you. And Dobby does. Dobby struggles through his residual fear and PTSD to say that the Malfoys are very bad dark wizards. Once the words are out of his mouth, he immediately starts self-harming. Harry has to intervene and tells him that it's okay, he just needs more practice. Dobby thanks him for intervening. Winky cries that Dobby does not need more practice and that he is a bad elf and that he should not be speaking ill of any master. She also cries that Mr. Crouch needs her. How will he survive without Winky to take care of him? In part 1, we discussed how it's possible JKR coded the house-elves to reflect women's unpaid work and invisible labor in society. Their degradation, their objectification, so on and so forth. It is agreed upon, particularly in America, that capitalism doesn't function without the invisible work of women. But it's these conversations about secrets, pining, and love that really cement that idea for me. It is regarded as a woman's job to defend the reputation of her man or her family at her own expense, even if that expense is her safety. This does include keeping silent about violence and aggression that takes place in the home, regardless of whether or not that woman is subjected to it. This is something that Dobby has certainly experienced and doesn't talk about. Women are taught that it's our honor and our privilege to keep secret the certain wrong, horrific behaviors or habits of the men that we are intimate with. Women's reputations for being chatty Cathys is entirely false. We know that in social spaces, men have been conditioned to believe that a woman is talking more than she is or taking up more space than she is due if she speaks for 30% of the conversation. The reason that men have such a hard time with women talking, and the reason that something like gossip is something that has such disdain around it, is because women talking to one another means that men and their violent behaviors are not protected by their community. When women confide in one another and have intimate relationships with other women, it does mean that men are held accountable outside of their home. Is JKR commenting on the way that women are forced, asked, or consent to keep silent even at their own expense? And Winky's language in this scene, to me, seems a mockery almost. It's an echo of the conversations that women typically have after they are left, cheated on, or otherwise betrayed by the person they have sacrificed an enormous amount of themselves, their safety, their relationships, their careers, XYZ for. Women, or perhaps all people under capitalism, have been taught to value themselves based on their utility. For women, it's their utility to others. Winky's insistence that Barty needs her specifically is immediately dismissed by the humans she's in conversation with, and dismissed by us as the reader. It sounds ludicrous. Winky has been stripped of individuation. Without rights and without agency, she is simply simply another house elf. She is entirely othered. And we as the reader think it's ridiculous to think that she's irreplaceable, because she's not. And that's on purpose. It will come out that Winky was actually intimately familiar with these family secrets and employed and entrusted to do tasks that may not be commonly asked of house elves. She was integral to keeping this secret and running the Crouch family house in a way that no one could have conceived of. The immediate dismissal that she may have been of some legitimate importance to Barty Crouch, in our perspective, says a lot about how we feel about house elves too, or me personally when I'm reading it. We take them for granted and we don't recognize them as individuals with wants or needs or particular purpose. Winky is in the background wailing about how much she misses Barty Crouch, how much Barty Crouch needs her, and how she is so ashamed to have been dismissed by him, while Dobby tries to have a conversation with Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Dobby tells them that he is saving money to purchase a sweater because that's all that he needs. And Ron offers to give Dobby his sweater this Christmas from Mrs. Weasley, as long as he doesn't mind maroon. On their way out of the kitchen, Dobby tentatively asks if he would be allowed to visit Harry Potter at school sometimes. And Harry's like, yeah, sure, Dobby. As they're leaving, the house elves load them up with cakes and treats and sweets to tide them over. They're like, here, take this, and you need this, and maybe also some of this, and it's more than the kids could ever need. On their way out, Hermione says hopefully it'll be good for the house elves to see Dobby working here and making wages, because he's clearly so pleased with his freedom. Maybe it'll rub off on them. And Ron says, yeah, as long as they don't get a good look at Winky, who is the opposite end of this spectrum, and not only seems to be drowning in a sort of self-loathing, but is also choosing enslavement at Hogwarts at this moment by not accepting any sort of pay. Then Ron says, seems like she was in love with Mr. Crouch, no? Hermione says, oh yeah, maybe, but she'll realize she was better off. You can hear it, right? So the question we have to ask is, if that's the intended metaphor, through the elves' language and action, what is the intended point? It may be JKR pointing at stay-at-home motherhood, insisting that women have been so oppressed and denigrated that they now fear freedom or are ill-equipped to handle independence and base their worth solely on the validation of their oppressor, which, you know, JKR has not drawn these lines herself or confirmed this theory. This entire plotline rubs people really the wrong way, because she's written a population whose natural and organic place and desire is enslavement. And I wonder if she hasn't confirmed this theory or alluded to it herself, because it probably is extremely offensive to women who run households, because ultimately the point is, from the perspective of Hermione, the point is there's an entire subpopulation of characters that can't understand what would be good for them or what would be right with them. It's sort of an invalidation of choices that a lot of women who have had the privilege to make those choices have made. She's written them in a way that makes their language sort of a parody. She makes them sort of frivolous and misunderstanding while good intentioned, and though extremely adept at magic and super necessary to the interworkings of the entirety of the magical world, let alone the Hogwarts castle, she's made these characters who are, yes, talented, but ultimately unable to grasp what brilliant JKR stand-in Hermione has understood from the start. I wonder if she thinks that this is legitimately more offensive, or would be received as more offensive than the werewolves are a metaphor for HIV. I think that's possible. What's frustrating is that this is where she leaves us, that Hermione's efforts towards social justice are ill-fated and ignorant and a waste of everyone's time and kind of annoying. And I don't know why she does that. This is the way things are. I don't know. December during the Triwizard Tournament means the holding of the Yule Ball. At the end of class one day, McGonagall draws the students' attention to the front of the room. She has to reprimand Harry and Ron, who are at that moment playing with two fake wands that Fred and George have invented. They're sword fighting. She tells the kids that it is customary for the hosting school of the Triwizard Tournament to throw a ball on Christmas Day, the Yule Ball, to celebrate the solstice. Even though this is a recreational event and a chance to let off some steam, she expects the utmost respect as it relates to the behavior of the Gryffindor students, and she will not be lowering her standards for this occasion. Only fourth years and above are invited to the ball, but they're welcome to choose a date from any age. She asks Harry Potter to stay behind after class, and she tells him individually that it's customary for the champions and their partners to open the ball with a dance. And Harry's like, partners? Your dance partner. You need to ask someone to the ball, and then you're going to open the ball with that person in front of the entirety of these three schools. And poor 14-year-old Harry has never even conceived of asking a girl on a date, not to the 3 broomsticks, let alone to a literal ball. It has not crossed his mind to engage a girl in conversation, let alone alone expressed interest in dancing with her. This conversation and this new challenge prompts Harry to suddenly notice just how many girls there are at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, because up until this point, he hadn't. Okay? Harry asks Ron why girls have to travel in packs, and Ron suggests lassoing one to get her alone. And I think we've just answered our own question there. The reason that girls have to travel in packs is because we are typically prey, so we are safer in numbers. Also, Ron is like, Harry, you literally just defeated a dragon in front of the entirety of the school. You're one of the Triwizard champions, and you're also Harry freaking Potter. You are not going to have a hard time finding a date. And Harry is amazed that Ron is actually correct, because that day, a curly-haired third-year Hufflepuff girl, who he's never spoken to, asks him to the dance. And I'm sorry, I know I'm interrupting the story again, but why does the Hufflepuff girl have curly hair? It's to discredit her, right? It's to make her seem like not a real option. Maybe that is me projecting. He immediately says no to her before he can even think about the repercussions of that. And just when he's thinking that it may not have been wise to dismiss his only invitation to the dance, other girls start asking him too. He's asked by a second-year girl he doesn't know and a fifth-year who he seems kind of afraid of. He's very aware that none of the girls that are asking him to the dance would be interested in him if he wasn't the Triwizard champion. Despite this additional adversity of having to find a date to the dance, he says that school is significantly more welcoming than it has been for the first semester. He says people aren't as hostile toward him anymore, and there aren't as many people wearing the badges. He thinks that Cedric has something to do with that. He thinks that Cedric asked the Hufflepuffs to back off with the taunts and the abuse. Listen to me, I love Cedric Diggory. And not because Arpats plays him. In fact, I would love him a lot more if Arpats didn't play him. Arpats, as much as I love Arpats individually, he has a tendency to ruin my favorite characters on film. In fact, as I'm making these videos and we get further into the books, it becomes harder and harder to select images from the movies to decorate the videos, because the Harry that we see on screen is so different, like entirely different in personality than the Harry that we're seeing in these books. More on that to come, but just know. More good news, no article about Hagrid ever appeared in the Daily Prophet. Hagrid tells the kids when him and Rita met at the Three Broomsticks, it seems like she was just trying to dig up dirt on Harry. Has Harry ever gotten in trouble? Does he have good grades? And Hagrid wouldn't budge, so the meeting ended. And Harry says, well, she should have talked to Snape. Potter's been crossing lines at this school since he got here. And Hagrid's like, did he really say that? Well, sure, Harry, you break some rules, but you're pretty all right. And Harry's like, thanks, Hagrid. People don't compliment Harry a lot. The kids are amping up for the ball, and there are rumors flying all over the school. The only thing that's really certain is that Dumbledore definitely did book the Weird Sisters. They're the band that's gonna play at the ball, and they are very, very famous. The Weird Sisters is a Shakespeare reference. In Macbeth, the Weird Sisters are meant to represent the fates. They tend to symbolize impending chaos, so this is foreshadowing and a fun literary reference. Hermione, meanwhile, has taken to worrying about Harry's ever-looming egg and the task that will follow it. He hasn't even begun to think about solving the egg, because the next task is February 24th and it's not even Christmas. He's like, I have so much time. But Hermione worries that it's going to take more time than that to figure out, and Hermione is right. Meanwhile, Fred and George are still being secretive. They ask Ron if they can borrow Pigwidgeon to send a letter, but Pig happens to be out finding Sirius, so Ron says no, and the twins are pretty rude about it. Fred and George ask the boys if they have dates to the ball yet, and they say no. Do you? And Fred says, you better hurry up or all the good ones will be taken. That line made it into the movie. They cut so much important information, but this we need to broadcast for the world. And then he looks across the common room. He says, hey, Angelina, do you want to go to the ball with me? And she's like, okay. Fred has asked Angelina, she's on the Quidditch team, or she would be if a sport existed at the school this year. And she says yes, and the boys are impressed, and none of them seem particularly embarrassed. But don't worry, it gets worse. Once the boys walk away, Ron says, they're right, you know. I don't want to get stuck with a pair of trolls. And I get that art imitates life. And I certainly, like Hermione, have been witness to a lot of disgusting rhetoric on the part of boys that we consider to be the good guys, on the part of people that don't have any knowledge of or respect for women. But why is this in here? Why this way? My expectation is not that our characters are perfect. I understand that they are 14-year-old boys. My wondering is why I, as a human person, have to tolerate misogyny and ignore the casual disrespect of women on the part of these beloved good guy characters all the time, otherwise I'm a bad sport. And that sucks. The decorations for the ball go up, and Harry thinks they're the most beautiful decorations that Hogwarts has ever put up. Hogwarts is really putting on a show. There are 12 Christmas trees in the Great Hall, and they're adorned with live golden hooting owls, and all the suits of armor sing carols when you pass by. Time is running out to find a dance partner, and so Harry and Ron make an agreement that no matter what, they will come back to the common room tonight with dates. Harry finally resolves himself to ask Cho Chang, who he's had a crush on, I guess, for a few years, though he has never put words to it. This particular day, the day that he's working up the courage to ask Cho Chang, is also the day where he is tested on some sort of potion with Snape, and he forgets to add the bezoar, which is an integral ingredient to antidotes. And so he gets bottom marks, which is unfortunate, but it also means that he's not going to forget what a bezoar is anytime soon, thank God. Harry finds Cho and asks to speak to her alone, and all of her friends giggle, and Harry thinks giggling should be made illegal, but Cho doesn't giggle because she's not like other girls. Harry forces the words out of his mouth, and he's like, "Want to go to the ball with me?" And they're all jumbled up, so she doesn't understand, and she's like, "What?" And so he asks again, "Do you want to go to the ball with me?" Cho says she's really sorry, but she's already agreed to go with someone else. She's actually going with Cedric Diggory. Damn. Harry says totally fine. He's a total gentleman about it. And he walks back to the common room, just dejected and feeling empty. Poor Harry. The girl he likes is going with Cedric, the other Triwizard champion, the one that looks the part, the one that's so handsome and tall. Anyway, as he's walking back to the common room, he's like, I was prepared to like Cedric. Prepared to face the fact that he had beaten me at Quidditch, that he was super handsome and everyone's favorite champion, but now he knows he's just a brainless doofus, confirming that some boys really do just be hating. Harry gets back to the common room and finds an extremely disgruntled and upset Ron. Jenny, who's comforting Ron at the time with a little bit of a grin on her face, explains that Ron just asked Fleur Delacour to the ball in front of everyone. Something just came over him and he just shouted it at her. Fleur and Cedric had been talking and it just exploded out of him. And so Ron, years younger than Fleur and never having spoken to her, has just done what the third-year Hufflepuff girl has done to Harry. Harry says, "Listen, Ron, she's part Vila. Your ridiculous behavior was not your fault. It was hers. She was probably turning on the charm for old Diggory, and you must have gotten a blast of it. Hopefully, you can infer my feelings about all of this. The girls that ask Harry and the fangirls for all the boys are fickle and shallow, whereas Ron asking Fleur because she's so beautiful, even though he has no idea who she is, and they don't seem to like her personality at all. It's not his fault that he did something socially inappropriate, embarrassing. It's her part for being part Vila. She turned on the charm and she brought it on herself. I won't have it." I hate that. I hate that. Harry says she's wasting her time though because Cedric is taking Cho. I asked her and she just told me. Jenny's grin just drops off her face. She's like, "What?" Ron says, "This is ridiculous. We're the only fourth years left without any dates. Except for Neville." And guess who he asked? Hermione. He told me in potions. They laugh at Neville and Hermione's expense. He says, "But I guess Hermione said no." Neville said that Hermione's always really nice to him, so he thought he'd shoot his shot, but she said she was already going with someone. Ron says, as if. She obviously just didn't want to go with Neville. Who would? And Jenny's like, "Don't laugh. Don't do that." Hermione comes in through the portrait hole at that moment and asks why the boys weren't at dinner. And the boys are still laughing at Neville's expense. So Jenny tells them that the boys are in the common room because they've been rejected by the girls they asked to the dance. And Ron's like, "Nice, Jenny." Hermione says, "Oh, all the pretty ones taken, Ron? I'm sure you'll find someone, somewhere who will have you." And Ron, suddenly seeming to look at Hermione in a whole new light, says, "Wait a second, Hermione, you're a girl." She's like, "Well spotted. Why don't you come with me and Jenny can go with Harry?" And Jenny looks so miserable. She's like, "God damn it." Hermione says, "I can't go with you. I'm going with someone else." "No, you're not. You just said that to get rid of Neville." "No, I didn't. I already have a date." He goes, Okay. We know you're a girl. Now will you come to the dance with me?" And Hermione says, "You're an asshole. I already have a date." And then she storms off. And Ron's like, "She's lying." "She's not," says Jenny. "Who is she going with?" Jenny says, "It's not your business. And I can't go with Harry because I'm going with Neville. He asked me and I'm a third year." I hate that she has to remind them that she's a third year because they pay that little attention to Jenny. But whatever, she's like, "I'm a third year, so it's the only way I could go." She walks away, and at that moment, Parvati and Lavender come in through the portrait hole. And Harry's like, "Okay, whatever. Let me just solve this right now." And he walks up to Parvati and he's like, "Hey, will you go to the ball with me?" And after she stops giggling, she says yes. And then he asks Lavender on behalf of Ron. And Lavender can't go with Ron because she's already going with Seamus. And Harry's like, okay, well, do you know anyone that's still available that could go with Ron? And Parvati's like, maybe Hermione? And I hate that everyone just thinks Hermione is this ridiculously undesirable person, so she obviously doesn't have a date. Because she's clearly not, right? Like, well, one, just I think a lot of young girls that read these books, there's not a lot of people to identify with outside of Hermione, so we take offense on Hermione's behalf. But I think most people are attractive, right? Like, most people are beautiful. Anyway, eventually, Parvati says, well, my twin sister Padma is in Ravenclaw. She might go with Ron. The days leading up to the ball are filled with excitement, and Hermione overhears Fleur Delacour complaining about the food and saying that she's not going to fit into her dress because the food here is so heavy. And Hermione's like, she really thinks a lot of herself, doesn't she? And I think that conversation is meant to tell us something about both of these girls' characters. It's meant to imply that Fleur Delacour, part Vila and one of these beautiful girls, is vain in a way that is undesirable. It also happens to be about eating food, which kind of creates this impression that in Harry Potter, there aren't a lot of ways that as a woman you can eat food correctly. Petunia doesn't eat enough, Molly Weasley eats too much, and Fleur eats but has a problem with the way it's impacting her body. It does seem to be written in a very specific way, and we're going to talk about the women in JKR's work. More on that in a second. Meanwhile, Ron is constantly pestering Hermione, trying to get her to admit that she doesn't really have a date to the ball. And then one day, he notices her teeth. Malfoy has been bullying her about how ugly she is, and Ron is like, wait a second, your teeth are different. And she says, yeah, when Malfoy hexed me and Madame Pomfrey was shrinking my teeth back to normal size, I just had her take a little extra off the top. Hermione's parents are dentists. They would have wanted her to continue with braces, do things in the traditional medical way, but she's pretty excited about this magical alternative, and now she has a smile that she's proud of. And wouldn't it be cool if she hadn't have had to change to become beautiful in the eyes of the people that love her, like just once? It creates this impression that of course Hermione actually is beautiful, she just wasn't trying hard enough. Whatever. Pig returns with a letter from Sirius, and Sirius says that he was going to recommend that Harry use the conjunctivitis curse on the dragon. Apparently a dragon's eyes are their weakest points. This is the exact spell that Crumb himself used, leading to the dragon squashing some dragon's eggs. So Sirius went out of his way to warn Harry about Karkaroff and his pupil, and then he would have taught Harry the exact same curse. It just speaks to Sirius's values or the way that he approaches life. On Christmas Day, Harry wakes to Dobby sitting on his chest. He has a Christmas ornament, like little bauble, coming off of his like tea towel hat. Dobby, please don't do that. And Dobby is anxiously like, I'm so sorry. You did say that I could come and visit you. And Seamus peeks out from behind his curtain and is like, Harry, are you being attacked? Because just like probability wise, like these boys that room with Harry are like, yeah, Harry might be attacked at any moment. Since they're up, they decide to open all their presents, and Harry's got a great haul this year. Harry gives Dobby a pair of Uncle Vernon's old socks, and Dobby is delighted, but he's also like, oh my gosh, Harry Potter, they made a mistake at the shop. They give you two of the same kind. And Ron's like, here, Dobby, you can mix them up with these ones. And he tosses him some more socks, and then he gives Dobby his brand new Christmas sweater, hand knitted by his mother. And Dobby is extremely overwhelmed by all of this kindness. He says that he knows Ron must have been a great wizard in order to be best friends to Harry Potter, but he could not have anticipated how great, how selfless, how giving Ron would have been. And I think it's such a good reframe, right? It just lends, I think, all of us a little bit of perspective. It seems like Ron thinks of himself as the weak link in this golden trio, but the truth is, being involved in the trio at all lends itself to his greatness. I don't believe there's actually a hierarchy as it relates to these three children's utility. I think they're all necessary, not just to advance the plot, but to win the war. So the next time you're feeling down about yourself and comparing yourself to your friends, just remember, if you think your friend is great, you must also trust your friend's ability to make choices in friends. And if they've chosen you, that probably means something. The reason that Dobby is sitting on Harry's chest is because he wants to give him his Christmas present, and he has hand knitted a pair of socks for Harry. He bought the wool with his own wages. This is like the first present Dobby would have been able to give anyone, like literally ever. Harry also gets a single tissue from the Dursleys, which is apparently an all-time low. Hermione gives Harry a book about Quidditch teams of Ireland and Britain, and I don't know if we've ever seen Harry choose a present for Hermione, so hopefully she's also getting presents from these boys every year. Sirius gives Harry a penknife that can unknot any knot and unlock any lock, and Harry doesn't carry it around with him. It just like sits in the bottom of his drawer, just being totally useless. He gets a box of his favorite sweets from Honeydukes from Hagrid, and also a hand-knitted sweater from Mrs. Weasley. This year it's green and it has a dragon on it. The kids eat breakfast together and then eventually lunch, and they enjoy their slow Christmas day. They wander the grounds, and there's a snowball fight that Hermione opts to sit out of but watches. And then at 5 p.m. she goes up to the dormitory to get ready. And Ron is like, "What, you need 3 hours?" And then he gets hit in the face with a snowball. "Who are you going with?" Around 7 o'clock, the boys go inside and self-consciously change into their dress robes, of which Ron's are certainly the most horrible. That's so sad. And they make their way down to the common room to collect their Gryffindor dates for the Yule ball. Harry meets Parvati there, and he tells her she looks nice, and he tells us internally that she definitely does look nice. Hermione's not in the common room, and Ron asks about her. They all head down to the Great Hall, where Ron technically greets his date, but he's still just looking for Hermione. I literally don't know if he lays eyes on Padma. And that's so rude. Imagine being asked to the ball, like relatively last minute, and then ignored by these two popular guys. This guy has not even bothered to ask you. He's not even bothered to ask your sister. His friend asked your sister if you could go to the ball with him because he cannot secure a date for himself, and then he spends the entire night ignoring you. Rude. Malfoy is going with Pansy Parkinson. I think that's interesting. I like it whenever we see Malfoy have like just multiple dimensions, just like 2 at least, because he truly just spends the entire book just like shouting insults at our main characters. He has like no story going on. Harry sees Victor Crumb with a pretty girl in blue who he's never seen before. The champions are called to McGonagall, and the rest of the students are meant to enter the hall and take their seats. And Harry's working really hard not to look at Cedric and Cho, so he's looking at Fleur Delacour and her date, who seems like the that Fleur has chosen him. He looks at Victor Crumb, and then his eyes fall on Victor Crumb's date, who happens to be one Hermione Granger. Oh yeah, Hermione's date to the ball? International Quidditch star Victor Crumb? Maybe you've heard of him? Her hair is pulled back and it's sleek and shiny, and Harry says she's holding herself differently, or maybe it's just that she's not weighed down by 20 books, but she looks really, really beautiful. The people that usually bully Hermione about her appearance are really stunned by her transformation, and the fact that she's on the arm of the most desirable man of the room. And just imagine from Hermione's perspective, right? Because Hermione, like most of the worthwhile women in this book, I don't know if she's super bothered about the fact that people don't think she's particularly pretty. But what an awesome moment to have. Like, oh, Victor Crumb? Yeah, he asked me, he said he's never felt this way about any other girl. Like, is it a big deal? The champions are made to enter the feast to the applause of the other students, and Harry says Parvati seems to be enjoying herself. She's like smiling and waving, but like, what is she supposed to be doing? There's a little bit of shade being thrown toward Parvati, and it doesn't really feel fair. I feel like if anything, she's been wronged. The champions are ushered to the top table where they'll sit with the judges for the evening. Harry notices that Barty Crouch isn't at this table, but instead Percy Weasley is sitting in his seat. Percy says he's been promoted. It's noted that no one asks Percy why he's sitting here. He just like volunteers the information. But I gotta say, and I really I didn't realize I had this many thoughts about Percy. I really don't even like him. I just believe in fairness and justice. I gotta say, if I was basically an intern and then all of a sudden was sitting in the seat of the head of my department, I would also volunteer the information because I'd imagine that the people around me are wondering what I'm doing there, right? Anyway, Percy says not to worry. Crouch is suffering from overwork and is getting some well-earned rest. Percy says, truth be told, Crouch hasn't seemed right since the Quidditch World Cup. Harry is seated with the other champions and their dates, and the conversations that we get to overhear are very interesting. Dumbledore is telling Karkaroff about how he couldn't dream to understand all of Hogwarts' secrets, and thus he could not be the protector of them. Fleur is insisting that the decor is relatively lackluster and it's a lot better at Beauxbatons. And Hermione is teaching Crumb how to properly pronounce her name, which many people think was JKR's response to readers not knowing how to pronounce Hermione's name. Eventually, they're forced to dance, and Parvati takes the wheel. The two kids just revolve in a circle while the music plays until all the other students flood the floor. It's revealed that Harry is wearing the socks that Dobby made for him. Moody compliments him because his eye can see through clothing. And this is a school filled with children. There are 11-year-olds, and Parvati says that that's really creepy and maybe his eyes shouldn't be allowed if he can see through her clothing right now. She's got a point, but every time we get mention of Parvati, who I think is being a good sport under the circumstances, it's kind of with a note of disdain. Harry's a little bit frustrated with her. One, for her enjoying herself at the ball. Two, like she'll later kind of ignore Harry or be a little bit standoffish toward him because of the way he treats her at the ball, which is ultimately to just ignore her. And he's like, well, she seemed to have a good time anyway. I don't know why she has such a problem. And it's like, what the heck? Anyway, she's got a point. So you should know right now that the imposter with Moody's magical eye can see all of the children naked, I guess. As soon as the song stops, Harry's like, let's sit down. And Parvati's like, oh, but I like this song. And he's like, let's sit down. Fred and Angelina are on the dance floor and they are dancing so vigorously and intensely that the people around them are like getting injured, and I like to see that side of them. Maybe it's the same side actually, but I like to see it in this context. Back at the table, Harry asks Ron how it's going and Ron doesn't answer because he's too busy watching Hermione and Crumb dance. Within minutes of Harry and Ron ignoring their dates, Parvati is asked to dance by one of the Beauxbaton boys and she's like, you wouldn't mind, would you, Harry? And Harry doesn't even respond, so she goes. A pink-faced Hermione eventually joins the boys. She says Victor has gone to get drinks, and Ron is really rude to her, so she's like, what's up with you? He says, if you haven't figured it out, then I'm not going to tell you. And then he shouts, he's from Durmstrang. He's obviously using you to get close to Harry. You're fraternizing with the enemy. Hermione says, what? You were so excited by him. You wanted his autograph. Don't you have a tiny toy model of him up in your room? Ron says, what happened? Did he ask you in the library when you were asking him to join Spew? And she says, if you must know, he told me that the reason he's been in the library so much is to pluck up the courage to ask me. And you believe that? Hermione says, he's never asked me a single thing about Harry. Well, he's obviously hoping you'll help him with the egg then. Hermione says, I would never do that. I want Harry to win, and Harry knows that. Don't you, Harry? Harry's like, Ron, I don't care if she's dancing with Crumb. And he really doesn't, because Harry can be quite single-minded. We, as the reader, perhaps for a few books, have become aware that Ron maybe has a crush on Hermione. That Ron is perhaps interested in Hermione as more than a friend. He pays a lot of attention to her, he seems to be watching her all the time, and it seems pretty clear that the two are interested in one another. But what he's just said, that Victor Crumb is obviously using Hermione to get to Harry, implies that Victor Crumb would have no other interest in Hermione alone. And that's really rude and really mean. He's disparaging Hermione by saying that. He says something rude about going to find Vicky, and Hermione leaves. And before long, Victor Crumb approaches the boys. Do you know how stinking cute this is? He's an international superstar. The actual whole world does know his name. He spent his year abroad in the library trying to ask the top student in this foreign school to the dance. And every time he enters the library, because of his entourage, she immediately leaves. And he can't even say her name right. Like, I love him. Also, something else that's kind of funny is at the beginning of this book, it's reiterated twice, okay, that Victor Crumb is 18 years old. Or Ron thinks he's 18 years old. But they say 18 twice. And it is possible that by the time they go to the ball, Hermione is 15. That's possible. But when I posted that last video mentioning this age discrepancy, there was a lot of commentary around how old Hermione actually is because of the time turner situation. Did Hermione age 3 years last year because she was doing every single day 3 times? There was also discord because the year before that she had been petrified, which would have halted her aging for however many months she was there. And that has me cracking up. My thought is, if we have to do the math to figure out if it's okay, it might not be okay. Crumb arrives at the table with 2 butterbeers. I love a man that's looking for his girl with 2 drinks in his hand. I just think it's really vulnerable. Anyway, he has to approach her 2 guy friends. I like him. Where is Hermione? If you see her, tell her I have drinks. They say they don't know where Hermione is. Percy approaches the table and says, did you guys make friends with Crumb? Great, that's the whole point. International magical cooperation. And then Percy sees 1, Bagman kiss McGonagall's hand. And then 2, Fred and George assertively approach Bagman. And Percy has kind of a freak out. He's appalled. He's like, why are they talking to him? And now, I will tell you, remember how the twins bet their entire life savings on the Quidditch World Cup final and how they thought that Ireland was going to win, but Crumb would catch the snitch, and they bet with Bagman. And when they collected with Bagman, turns out he paid them in leprechaun gold, and that gold disappears after a few hours. It's not real gold. So the twins have been all year trying to figure out how to tactfully approach this conversation with Ludo Bagman, the head of a department, a former international sports player, and their dad's colleague. So they have to be really careful about their phrasing and their various approaches. So all year they've been trying to get a hold of him and writing letters. And just imagine the moments of distress and consideration that have to go into the twins trying to approach this topic. They must have discovered their money gone, figured out what had happened, and then having to say, hey, Bagman, maybe you accidentally, probably not on purpose, paid us in leprechaun gold and you owe us a shit ton of money. Bagman, a government official, has been avoiding them. And when they do approach him, he tells them that they're too young to gamble anyway and that they should forget it. And so they ask for their original money back and he says no. So this government official, who is also negligent at his job and corrupt in his position, has stolen the life savings of two teenagers, the teenage sons of his colleague, no less. And I think there's a point about likability being made here because Bagman is sort of universally liked by everyone around him, despite the fact that he is terrible at his job, he is negligent in his position, and he is attempting to cheat from his position of power, which we'll talk about later. And Bagman never really gets his due for this theft. Everyone likes Bagman, maybe even because he doesn't do his job, whereas people like Percy and Barty Crouch are regarded as sort of killjoys because they are responsible. Percy is unlikable and extremely reliable. He spends the entire year doing the work for the head of the department as an intern. And Bagman, who may be talented in some areas, is otherwise useless in every single other one. Percy approaches Bagman to apologize for his brother's behavior. He's like, I don't know why they think they can talk to you. And Bagman lies and says it's no big deal, that he was just telling them that he could connect the boys to his contact at Zonko's joke shop, which is just lies. Lies, 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 lies. Harry and Ron go for a walk to get away from Percy, and they find themselves in the garden with a lot of other students that seem to be doing, adolescent intimacy things in the bushes. They overhear a few important conversations from their spot in the garden. One of those conversations is between Karkaroff and Snape. Karkaroff, in a hushed voice, is telling Snape that he can't ignore the signs any longer, that it's getting stronger and it's getting darker. He's talking about the dark mark tattooed on his left forearm. We eventually learn that Voldemort's Death Eaters were all branded with his mark, the very same one we saw cast in the sky at the beginning of the book. It's essentially a means for Voldemort to call his disciples back to him at any given moment. My understanding is that when Voldemort disappeared, the mark disappeared. It's no longer on the Death Eaters, which is what made them so hard to identify in a court of law. Something that Harry and Ron won't understand till the end of the book is that Karkaroff is at that moment telling Snape that his dark mark is filling in, implying that Voldemort's strength is returning. Snape tells Karkaroff to flee then, but he's staying at Hogwarts. More on this later. Harry and Ron aren't sure what to make of this conversation, but it does further their suspicions of Snape because Sirius has told them that Karkaroff was a former Death Eater and the two are having a whispered conversation at night. It just looks suspicious. At the same time, Snape is blasting hexes into the bushes and taking points from the students he finds intertwined or occupied in them. The second conversation they overhear is between Madame Maxime and Hagrid. Hagrid is speaking in a husky voice to Madame Maxime, and Harry is like, we gotta get out of here. I am certain that Hagrid does not want us to overhear this. But they aren't able to run in the opposite direction because Fleur Delacour and her date, they're busy in the bushes, and Ron doesn't want to pass them because he's already embarrassed himself in front of Fleur Delacour. I don't think Fleur remembers who he is, but whatever. They're blocking the exit, and so the boys are stuck overhearing this conversation. Harry tries not to listen and instead intently stares at a beetle that's on the reindeer statue in the garden. Harry overhears Hagrid confide in Madame Maxime about his origin. He says that he knew that Madame Maxime was like him when he saw her. She says she doesn't quite understand what he means, but he continues. He explains that his own mother was a giant and that he was raised by his father until his father died in his second year of Hogwarts. Hagrid asks her which side of her family the giant gene comes from, and she immediately shuts him down. She's very offended. She says she's going back to the dance, and she says she just has big bones. She storms off and leaves Hagrid sitting there alone with his vulnerability and his confession, and it's pretty sad. Ron is like, oh my god, did you know that Hagrid is part giant? And Harry's like, no, so what? Hagrid's bigger than everybody else. Why Why would that be crazy? Once back inside, Ron explains that giants have a pretty extreme reputation in the wizarding world. They have basically been run out of Britain entirely, if not just flat out murdered. Not only did they side with Voldy in the war, but they're known to be extremely vicious creatures. Several wizards throughout the book say that they just assume Hagrid had had some sort of incident as a child, swallowed a bottle of Skelligro or something like that, and that's why he's so big. Harry, not necessarily versed in wizarding lore or wizarding prejudices, is very much like, okay, why does this matter? Hagrid's great, and we'll talk more about giants in a second. They talk about giants for the rest of the dance, and Harry spends a lot of time trying not to look at Cedric and Cho. They decide to go to bed, and Harry is not bummed that the evening is over because he's like, this whole thing has been like way more trouble than it was even close to worth. On his way up to bed, Cedric stops Harry on the stairs, leaving Cho a few paces behind him. And Harry's like, yes. Cedric says, listen, I owe you for the dragons. If you haven't figured out the egg yet, just take it to the bath and mull things over in there. Use the prefect's bathroom. The password is Pine Fresh. I gotta go. I want to say goodnight. And Harry's like, yeah, whatever. Harry's like, this guy sucks. Was he trying to make me look bad in front of Cho and trying to make himself look better? He's already got the girl. Like, what is even the point? He decides he's going to disregard this bathroom information. He gets to the common room and he finds Ron and Hermione in a shouting match. Hermione says, well, you know what the solution is, right? Next time, ask me before someone else does, and not as a last resort. Ron has essentially ruined this magical princess knight Cinderella moment for Hermione. And Ron is like, well, she's missed the point then, hasn't she? And Harry's like, no, I think she's got the point, friend. The next day, Ron and Hermione are speaking, but only very cordially to one another. They're discussing the Hagrid as a giant revelation, and Hermione isn't too pressed. She's like, well, it's just bigotry, right? Like the werewolf stuff? But Ron says, no, it's not just bigotry, that she is just misunderstanding. And Ron is wrong. But what's frustrating about Hermione paralleling this to the werewolves, like we talked about in Prisoner of Azkaban, the werewolves are, at heart, predators. It's Lupin that is able to distinguish himself from what is described to be his nature. Harry's starting to worry about the egg clue because from this side of Christmas, the task seems a lot closer than it did before, and he really can't figure it out. He hasn't forgotten Cedric's advice about taking a bath, but he thinks it's not really a fair exchange, is it? Right? Like, he found Cedric and told him straight up that it was dragons, and Cedric's idea to repay him is to give him some vague clue about bathing, and Cedric is always walking hand in hand in the hallway with Cho, and that doesn't make things easier. When the term starts again, the Slytherins and the Gryffindors head to care of magical creatures, but instead of finding Hagrid, they find a substitute, Professor Grubbly Plank. Harry's like, where's Hagrid? And the substitute's like, he's not here today. He's otherwise indisposed. And Harry's like, where's Hagrid? And Grubbly Plank's like, he's not here today. Anyway, Grubbly Plank actually teaches them a very fine lesson about unicorns. Apparently, they're quite skittish around men, so the girls are able to approach while the boys hang behind. She's very informed about the creatures, and Hermione thinks it was a nice change of pace from the Scroots. In fact, most of the students really enjoyed Grubbly Plank's lesson, and none of them got hurt during it. And Harry's like, where's your goddamn loyalty? You didn't think that was better than Hagrid's class, right? Like, the reason that Hagrid is missing today, Malfoy illuminates for the trio, is because Rita Skeeter has written an article about him and it's come out in the Daily Prophet this morning. She somehow got the information about Hagrid being part giant, and she has released that information that Hagrid hadn't shared with anyone but maybe Dumbledore in his entire life, to the entire world. The article says that Hagrid, expelled in his 3rd year, has been given authority over young students, and he is using his unearned power to terrify them with horrific creatures, as his giant nature suggests he would. Skeeter cites Malfoy getting injured by the hippogriff last year, and there's a quote from Crabbe about how he got a nasty bite off a flubberworm, which is just a lie. The article also says that Hagrid admits to illegally breeding the Scroots, which is like so bad. That is so bad. Hagrid says he was just having some fun, but now he's sicked these illegally bred animals on the students. Skeeter names Hagrid's mom, Fredwulfa. She says she's a giantess whose whereabouts are currently unknown, and though she did not side with Voldemort during the war 13 years ago, giants were responsible for some of the worst mass muggle killings in history. After school, the kids knock on Hagrid's door for a really long time, pleading with him to come out, telling him they saw the article and they don't care who he was related to. Hagrid never answers the door, and they don't see him for a full week. That weekend, the kids go to Hogsmeade, and Hermione is surprised that Harry is coming because she's like, don't you have to be working on the egg? Is this the best use of your time? Harry lies and says he basically has the egg figured out. He really wants to go to Hogsmeade because he wants to search for Hagrid at the Three Broomsticks, which is the pub that he's usually at. On the walk to Hogsmeade, they see Crumb on the Durmstrang ship in a bathing suit, and they watch him dive into the Black Lake. And the kids are like, damn, he's got nerves of steel. Must be really cold where he comes from for him to be able to just tolerate the lake water recreationally. Ron implies that maybe the giant squid will eat him, and Hermione's like, he's actually really nice, and he likes Hogwarts a lot more than Durmstrang. They get to Hogsmeade and no sign of Hagrid, but they do see Ludo Bagman, not in the office, again. The kids don't realize, but at that moment, Bagman is being like held up by goblins who he owes an enormous amount of money to. He has also conned those people out of money. Bagman pulls Harry aside to distract the goblins, and really for no other reason. Bagman tells Harry that Barty Crouch is sort of missing. Percy has been doing all of his work, and I guess Crouch has been sending owls with instructions, but no one's seen him in person in a long time. And people are starting to get concerned. He also says that people are really concerned about Bertha Jorkins now because she's been missing for like 8 months. She definitely arrived in Albania, and she doesn't seem the type to elope. But then he's like, why are we talking about this? Harry, how's the egg? Harry lies, and Bagman says, Harry, listen, I feel bad. Didn't volunteer for this tournament. If there's ever anything I can do to help you out, all you'd have to do is say the word and no one would know. Bagman is a cheat. Harry's like, well, did you offer Cedric any help? Bagman's like, well, no. Then Fred and George approach and they say, Bagman, can we buy you a drink? And I think that is so wise, like such a good and tactful way to approach this person. This person is in an enormous position of power over these students, and I think they do a really good job handling it. Then Bagman just like hurries out of the Three Broomsticks because he owes like half the people in there a bunch of money. Ron teases Hermione about the goblins and is like, are you gonna stick up for them too? And Hermione's like, no, they don't need sticking up for. Haven't you been listening? In Professor Bin's class, we're learning about their revolution. Like, they are fine. Then they see Rita Skeeter, whom Harry confronts. Movie Harry would never, right? But Harry's like, oh, hey, are you here to ruin someone else's life? Rita says, Harry, I'm merely doing my duty to my readers. They have a right to knowledge and information. And then she says, well, Harry, if you'd like to clarify, perhaps you and I could sit down and you could tell me about Hagrid. Is he a sort of father figure for you? Hermione says, you're a terrible person. And Rita, the adult, bullies Hermione, the 14-year-old child, about her hair, which Hermione tells Harry after the dance that, of course, she felt beautiful when she did her hair the way she did for the dance, but it took far too much time and energy. So Rita makes fun of Hermione's hair, and Ron says, Hermione, why did you do that? She's going to be after you now. And Hermione's like, my parents don't read The Prophet. What she got on me? Bring it. They run to Hagrid's from there, Hermione leading the charge, and Hermione pounds on Hagrid's door and is like, come out, come out! And the door opens, and to Hermione's surprise, it's Dumbledore standing there. And Hermione, the top student at the school, who has such profound admiration and respect for teachers, is like, oh, hello. Hagrid is sitting at his table and his eyes are swollen and he looks a real mess. It's only occurring to me now that Hagrid sounds a lot like the word haggard, and that's meant to reflect his appearance. Dumbledore summons more tea and cakes seemingly from thin air, and he says, Hagrid, did you by any chance hear what Hermione was shouting when she was pounding on your door? These children appear to want to know you despite the new information that's come to light. Harry's like, Hagrid, you can't think that this would change how we feel about you. What do we care who you're related to? Dumbledore says, living proof of what I've been telling you, Hagrid. I've had letters pouring in all morning from parents who were formerly students who remember you from their time here. Most of the letters say that if I sacked you, I'd have them to contend with. There's so many letters in your defense. Hagrid says, not everyone thinks that. Dumbledore says, well, if you're holding out for universal popularity, you're gonna be in this cabin for a really long time. Harry says, I'm related to the freaking Dursleys and you've never judged me for it. Dumbledore says, my own brother Aberforth was persecuted for inappropriate charms on a goat? I'm not gonna analyze it. What is that? Whatever. He says, I refuse to accept your resignation, Hagrid, and I expect to see you at breakfast at 8:30 sharp tomorrow. Goodbye. And then he leaves. And Hagrid sobs in his absence. And Ron is like, you gonna eat these cakes, Hagrid? Hagrid shows them pictures of his dad, which he never has before because it illuminates that Hagrid is part giant. He's so much bigger than his dad as a toddler. Hagrid says there are some people of giant origin, pointing toward Madame Maxine, that would rather pretend they just have big bones. But he's not ashamed of who he is or where he comes from. And it's rich, right, for Hagrid to be talking about the nature of House-elves when his own nature is the reason that he's had to hide his past, his origin, and why he's faced prejudice in his life. I do think Hagrid is coded as the type of character who really believes in justice and is a good person on a micro level, but when macro issues are illuminated, he probably wouldn't vote for the liberal policy that I would. I see that in him, I guess. Hagrid says Harry reminded him a lot of himself when Harry got to Hogwarts and didn't know anything about wizardry and seemed really lost. And now look at him, Hogwarts champion. He says, Harry, it would really mean the most to me if you could win this tournament and just show them that you don't have to be pureblood to do it. The guilt that Harry feels because he's lied to Hagrid about how he's getting on with the egg prompts him to take up Cedric's offer about the prefect's bathroom. He decides that he'll go to the prefect's bathroom in the dead of night so that he can have extended privacy. He takes the Marauder's map under the cloak and runs himself a bath in what sounds like truly the most magical bath oasis. The prefect's bathroom is a candle-filled chamber with a bathtub the size of a swimming pool. It has a diving board. Everything is made of white marble, and there are about 100 golden taps, all with various bath additions. There's a gold frame picture of a mermaid on the wall. Harry plays with the taps for a minute, and some pour pink and blue bubbles the size of footballs, and one of the taps pours out this ice white foam that's thick enough to support a person's weight. Incredible. He swims around for a bit and then he reckons he better open the egg. And when he does, the screeching noise fills the bathroom again and he shuts it really quickly. When he snaps the egg shut, moaning Myrtle pipes in. I'd put it in the water if I were you. And JKR gets a lot of criticism. She writes a lot of girls and women into these books that are very much predators. And that in and of itself is not an issue. Of course, women can be predators. They usually aren't the predators, but of course they can be. So that's not the issue. The issue is that if you put the woman characters in the book next to the male characters, there are a vast array of men characters in these books that are extremely flawed and multifaceted beings, yet we admire them for a number of reasons. Whereas the girl-women characters must be a very specific type of way in order to earn Harry's moral approval. That way is typically responsible, attractive but not on purpose, unemotional, caregiving, and unburdensome. And McGonagall, Hermione, Ginny, any character that doesn't face disdain for being womanly is coded in this very specific way, which leads readers to believe that that's what JKR thinks a woman should be like. It's clear through the text and JKR's current politics that she believes there's a very specific way to be a worthwhile woman. Tons of different ways to be an admirable man. More on this in Order of the Phoenix. So Harry's like, Myrtle, I'm naked in the bath and I'm 14 years old. And Myrtle tells Harry that she closed her eyes when he got in and dropped his towel. She says it's been ages since Harry's been to visit her in her bathroom. And Harry's like, I'm not supposed to go in the girls' bathroom. Myrtle admits to sometimes sneaking up to the prefect's bathroom to watch prefects bathe, which is just wild. It's just just why? I don't understand why. Like, why? Why can't Myrtle have literally anything? No redeeming qualities? She tells Harry to put the egg in the water like Cedric did. And then she's like, you have to put your head under the water too, Harry. And when he opens the egg and puts his head underwater, he can hear mermaid song. And it translates that screeching noise into a clue. Come and hear us where our voices sound. Anyway, Harry works out that there are mer people in the lake and that he'll have an hour to retrieve something that the mer people have taken from him or will be guarding, and that's what the second task is. Myrtle tells Harry that Harry figured it out so much faster than Cedric. It's like, justice for Cedric. Myrtle tells a story about how no one cares that she's dead and how no one cared when she died, and that she stalked a girl from school until that girl had to go to the Ministry of Magic, and it's just like, it's so weird. It's just a weird scene, and it's a bummer because it's in this gorgeous bath situation. Damn. Anyway, so the big thing that Harry has to figure out now before the challenge is how is he going to breathe underwater for an hour? And of course, avoid the giant squid. But I don't actually know if the giant squid is a threat, given that it seems to have pushed Dennis Krevy out of the lake when he fell in at the beginning of the year. And I'm just like sort of imagining that maybe the giant squid has like a fondness for all the students, and maybe the giant squid is in the lake and it always goes with the kids during their ceremonial row across the lake. Like maybe the squid also ushers the first years into Hogwarts. Like, wouldn't that be cute? And just no one knows. Anyway, Harry gets out of the bath, he gets back under his cloak, and he checks the map to head back to the common room. When he's looking at the map, it seems like the only person that's awake in the castle is Barty Crouch, who is at that moment walking around in Snape's office. And Harry's like, what? He was too sick to come to the ball, but he's not too sick to be searching Snape's office in the middle of the night? Harry is thinking that that's really weird, and he's so preoccupied with the Marauder's map that he forgets to skip the trick step on the staircase that leads up to the Gryffindor common room. So his leg sinks into the step up to like his knee, and he gives a lurch, and before he can stop it, the egg that is like metallic and made of gold goes bouncing down the steps of the castle, and when it lands, it opens, and the screeching wailing is just like echoes through this cavernous hall. The cloak has slipped off of Harry, and the Marauder's map has fallen 6 steps down, and Harry is stuck in the trick step. The only way to get out is to be pulled out. So this enormously loud commotion has just been made basically right outside the Gryffindor common room. He can't run away because he's stuck, and the map is open and in full view. Anyone could read it. Filch comes running down the hallway, and he assumes the racket to be Peeves, and so he's like shouting about Peeves, the castle poltergeist. He finds the egg and he clicks it shut, and Harry's like, God damn, because there's not very many people that have those eggs in this castle. In fact, there are about 2 people that have those eggs in this castle. Harry has pulled the cloak back over him, but he's not able to move out of the way. Filch breaks out into excitement because he thinks that what he has in his hand here is evidence that Peeves has finally crossed the line and has stolen from one of the Triwizard Champion. He is so excited to tell Dumbledore because Peeves really is a real thorn in Filch's side. Suddenly, wearing a long gray nightshirt, so Snape is coming out in a nightgown, Snape comes around the corner and asks what's going on. Filch says, "It's Peeves, sir." Snape says, "Peeves couldn't get into my office." Filch is like, "This egg was in your office?" "Of course not. I heard banging and wailing." "Yes, Professor, that was the egg. I was coming to investigate." "Peeves threw it, Professor." And just imagine Filch, the only person in the whole castle who cannot do magic. His main job is cleaning up after wizard children that have a tendency to do pretty extreme damage and harm. And pesky ghosts. He has to undo all the damage by hand. And he gets no respect or kindness. And I get that he, can be something of a bully himself. He's vindictive, but it still sucks. And he thinks, finally, here it is, proof, a reason to get rid of the thing that is ruining my life. Snape says, "When I passed my office, I saw torches were lit and the cupboards were ajar. And Peeves couldn't have done that, so we're having kind of like a miscommunication comedy of errors between Filch and Snape here. And Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, is peering at Harry, and Harry is praying that cats can't see through invisibility cloaks, and he's like cursing himself for using all that soap. Probably Mrs. Norris can smell him. Moody limps into scene. Pajama party, is it? Filch says they were investigating, and then Snape discovered that someone had broken into his office. "Shut up," says Snape. Moody's eyes travel over Filch and the egg and Snape in the nightdress, and eventually they land on Harry. They make eye contact because Moody can see through invisibility cloaks. Harry's like, shit. Moody says, "Did I hear you correctly? Someone broke into your office?" It's the guy playing Moody. Moody broke into Snape's office. Snape says, "A student, I dare say. It's happened before. Students stealing ingredients and mixing illicit potions." And low-key, I'd be upset if a student stole my ingredients too. Like, that's not that cool. Moody says, "Ingredients, eh? Not hiding anything else in that office?" And Snape says, "You know very well that I'm not hiding anything else in my office given that you searched it so thoroughly at the start of the term. Auror's privilege. Dumbledore told me to keep an eye." Snape says, "I refuse to believe that Dumbledore told you to search my office. He happens to trust me." And that's quite a line, right? It's something that is really passed over and moved through, but that Snape is immediately suspicious of Moody because he has such faith in Dumbledore's faith in him. That's a really, really important line and is ultimately the crux of the entire book series. Moody says, "Some spots don't come off, Snape," and Snape grabs his left forearm as if it has pained him. Just when Harry thinks they're all gonna go their separate ways, Moody says, "You dropped something, by the way," and motions to the Marauder's map. And Harry throws caution to the wind and he's like, "It's mine, it's mine, it's my map." Snape goes to reach for the parchment, comprehension dawning on his face. "Accio parchment," Moody says, and snags the map. Snape's eyes look up the staircase. He knows it's Harry. And it is Harry. "My mistake, must have dropped it earlier," says Moody, covering for Harry. "Potter," says Snape. And then Snape goes like walking up the steps with his arms in front of him, like trying to find an invisible Harry. "What's that?" says Moody. Moody says, "Snape, there's no one there." And Dumbledore will be interested to know that that's the first place that your mind went. Dumbledore is really interested to know who might have it in for Harry, so I'll be sure to share this information with him. And Snape's like, It was an old habit of Potter's to sneak around the castle at night, and I had hoped he'd stopped for his own protection. Moody's like, got Potter's best interest at heart, have you? And in a lot of ways, he does. Snape says, I'm going back to bed. And Moody says, that's the best idea you've had all night. Filch, I'll take the egg. Filch is like, no, sir, I'm so sorry, but this egg is the only evidence of Peeve's treachery. Moody says, it belongs to the champion that he stole it from, and I'll see that it's returned. Filch walks away, and I am disheartened for him. But also, Peeves didn't steal the egg, so, that was a close one, Potter. Harry's hoping Moody's going to pull him out of the staircase because his leg is really hurting now, but Moody continues to make somewhat idle chit-chat with him. Moody's looking intently at the Marauder's map. Harry, you didn't happen to see who broke into Snape's office, did you? Harry says, yeah, actually, it was Barty Crouch. Moody's like, are you sure? And Harry says, yeah, I am. And after some consideration, Harry decides to ask, what do you reckon Mr. Crouch was looking for in Snape's office? Moody says, they say old Mad-Eye is obsessed, but I'm nothing compared to the vindictive vendetta of Barty Crouch. Crouch is probably just looking for dark wizards. There's one thing that Moody hates. It's a Death Eater that walked free, which is... We'll talk about it. Moody says now he has a question for Potter, and Harry starts to panic because he's pretty sure that Moody's going to ask the origins of the map, and that story incriminates not only his own father, Sirius Black, Fred and George, and himself, but Moody says, can I borrow this? Harry's like, oh, yeah. Of course. And even though he's really fond of the map and doesn't feel comfortable giving it up, it's better than getting in trouble for having it. Moody tells Harry that he'd make a good Auror because of the conversation that they've had and the deductive reasoning that he believes Harry has employed. Harry is beaming because he's never before considered a future, and now he has this idea about being an Auror, and it's come from someone who he respects and trusts. Also, this does mean that the bad guy has the Marauder's map, and that's not good news. Harry doesn't know that yet. In Flitwick's class the next day, they're working on banishing charms. They discuss all this new information that has come to light. They think it's extremely peculiar that Crouch would be searching Snape's office in the middle of the night, but they think this implicates Snape, and they also think that it means something about whatever's going on with Barty Crouch. But Hermione says, if you trust Dumbledore, you have to trust Snape. Dumbledore's always been right before. They turn their focus and attention to Harry surviving underwater for an hour. Ron suggests a summoning charm, and Harry tells Ron about scuba tanks, but Hermione tells him that in the unlikely event that Harry could figure out how to work a scuba kit in the allotted time, the kit itself probably wouldn't even work because most technology doesn't work at Hogwarts. Doesn't work right, so aqualungs, not an option. They search tirelessly to the answer to this quest, spending every lunch and dinner and any other free time in the library. McGonagall even writes them a pass to look at the books in the restricted section, but they really can't find anything. They're having no luck. The days dwindle down, and there's only 5 days, 4 days, 2 days, 1 day left until this task. Harry is starting to struggle to eat, and he thinks that even if at this point in time he does find a spell that works, he'd have a real job mastering it in the short time he has left. On Monday morning, he receives a letter from Sirius that says, send the date of your next Hogsmeade visit, and Harry writes back immediately with the date and sends it off. For whatever reason, upon Hagrid's return, he has continued the lesson that Professor Grubbly-Plank has started. Perhaps the lesson about unicorns was always in the plans. I don't know. Also, there are only 2 Scroots left, and it turns out Hagrid knows quite a bit about unicorns as well as monsters, and so they have a really, really good care of magical creatures lesson for the first time in basically 2 years. Hagrid has managed to bring out some baby unicorns who have coats of pure gold and are just so gorgeous. Hagrid pulls Harry aside to tell him that he's sure he's gonna win the Triwizard Tournament. He can just feel it in his bones. And that is a lot of pressure. It's the evening before the second task, and Harry feels trapped in a nightmare. They cannot find a spell, and he doesn't believe he'd be able to perform it even if they do. Ron gives up, says, why don't you just stick your head in the water, shout for the mer people to give you back whatever they took, and hope that they do. Best you can do, best you can hope for. Hermione says there has to be something, and she's developed a sort of surly attitude because she seems to be taking offense to the fact that the library isn't solving her problem, even though it always has before. Later in the evening, Fred and George emerge from around the stacks, and they tell Ron and Hermione that McGonagall needs them in her office. All the kids are like shit because they think they're about to get in trouble for cheating. That's not what's happening. Harry's kicked out of the library at 8 p.m., and he's the last person in the common room by midnight, just looking at every single spell that he can in book after book after book. As students go up to sleep, they wish him luck on the task tomorrow, and they share the faith that they have in him. And Harry's like, yeah, it must be nice. Crookshanks curls up in Harry's lap, and he eventually decides that, you know what, he gives up. He's gonna tell the judges he can't do it, and he's just gonna have to exit the tournament. And just as he resolves himself to that fate, he has an intrusive thought of Fleur Delacour saying, of course he cannot do it, he is a little boy. And he's like, you know what, never mind. He puts the invisibility cloak back on, and he heads to the library, and he's gonna keep searching. He reads and he reads and he reads, and he eventually falls asleep on top of a book. He wakes up to Dobby poking him, and Harry's like, stop poking me. And Dobby's like, Dobby must poke Harry Potter, sir. The next task starts in 10 minutes, and Harry needs to go now, and Harry's panicking because he cannot hope to participate in the next task because he can't breathe underwater. As he's collecting his things, Dobby tells Harry that he's procured for him some gillyweed. He stole it from Snape's office. The reason that he knew to steal this plant was because he overheard Moody telling McGonagall that it would be a smart thing for one of the champions to use. So this gillyweed, when Harry eats it, will make it possible for him to breathe underwater for an hour. Dobby did all of this because Harry Potter must go into the lake and find his Wheezy. Dobby could not let Harry Potter lose his Wheezy. And Harry's like, his Wheezy? Harry Potter cannot lose his Wheezy who is giving Dobby his sweater. Harry's like, they have Ron? And Dobby says, you have to eat this slimy ball of unidentified plant right now, otherwise you won't be able to get your Wheezy. Harry's like, Dobby, are you sure about this? Because, you know, trusting in Dobby's judgment wouldn't have gotten Harry very far before. In fact, has caused Harry a lot of additional adversity, I would say. But he hasn't got much other choice, so he takes the gillyweed and he runs down to the lake. He barely makes it on time, and what an actual nightmare. Like, the lack of preparation that Harry has for every single one of these tasks is so stressful. Anyway, Percy Weasley is sitting at the judges' table, again in place of Barty Crouch, and he scolds Harry for being so late. Bagman announces the start of the task on his whistle, and the champions are a go. Once the whistle blows, Harry, with seemingly no urgency, removes each sock and then each shoe and then just wades into the lake. He stuffs the gillyweed into his mouth, and he can hear people laughing behind him because probably the other Triwizard champions are employing some sort of magic, and it looks like Harry is just walking like from the shore into the water. The water is freezing cold and people are laughing, which is just so rude. Once Harry has swallowed the gillyweed, he finds that he has a hard time breathing. He can't breathe. Air no longer fills his lungs. He's formed gills and needs water to breathe. Pushes into the water and he swims out into the lake. It's really silent in the lake and it's dark and foggy. Harry is almost immediately attacked by several Grindylow, which are water demons, and he uses a spell to get them to release him. He eventually decides on a path and he swims in line when all of a sudden he is greeted by Moaning Myrtle, who can get down here because of the pipes. It's Myrtle that points him in the direction of the mer people. So far, none of Harry's ability to compete in this task, down to opening the egg and figuring out the clue, has been because he figured out any of this situation, which just goes to show that it really is about the team of people you have around you. So Myrtle points him in the direction of the mer people, and he gives her a thumbs up and thanks. Harry comes upon a mer town, a mer society, if you will. He swims into town and he describes the mer people as having gray skin and green hair and looking nothing like the beautiful mermaid depicted on the prefect bathroom wall. The deeper he gets into town, the closer the mer dwellings are together. Some mer people have gardens, and he even sees a Grindylow tied to a front lawn like a pet. In the middle of the village square, he sees Ron, Hermione, Cho Chang, and who he assumes to be Fleur Delacour's little sister, all tied to like the main statue in the mer town square. They are surrounded by a bunch of singing mer people. So Harry forgets he's a wizard and is like, damn, I didn't bring a knife. How am I gonna cut these ropes? Your wand, Harry. But instead, he spends some time trying to like mime to a mer person. He'd like to borrow their spear. And they're like, no, we don't help, we just guard. And so Harry swims down and he gets a particularly sharp rock and he like cuts Ron free. He spends so much time dawdling at the bottom of this mer village. And then he tries to go to cut Hermione free. But the mer people respond aggressively for the first time. Just your own friend, just one, they say. And Harry's like, well, she's my friend too. And I certainly don't want either of these two people to die either. Meanwhile, the mer people are like trying to do their part in what is essentially a play, right? And they're like, no, you can't have the other champions' things. You're like messing up the game. Like, just take one. But the clue, okay, so the song that the mer people sang said that if you're unable to rescue your item, it will be lost forever. And Harry takes that quite literally. And so he assumes that if the other Triwizard champions aren't able to save their folks, they will die. and Harry can't just swim to safety while other people are tied to the bottom of the lake. So the mer people are like, who is this guy? Like, just take your guy and go. Cedric swims up to the square and he has a giant bubble around his head, and he tells Harry to get out of there because Crumb and Fleur are on their way. And then Cedric pulls a knife, which he has had the wherewithal to bring, and he cuts Cho free and he swims away. Harry is sitting there waiting for the other champions because he's not going to leave anyone to die because that's just who he is. But he has his own time limit because gillyweed only lasts for an hour, and he's sitting here at the bottom of the lake, and also it's a plant, so I doubt it's like an hour on the clock, right? I doubt it's like super precise. Crumb comes swimming up to Harry, and he's transfigured himself into a shark, but he's been a little bit unsuccessful, so he only has the head of a shark. He tries to cut Hermione free with like his like shark jaws, but it's not working very well. So Harry's like, here, like, have this sharp rock. And he's like, thanks. And so he cuts Hermione free and he swims away with her. And then it's just Ron, Fleur Delacour's little sister, and Harry and the mer people at the bottom of this lake. It becomes clear to Harry that Fleur is not coming and he's not going to let the 8-year-old die. So he has to threaten the mer people and sort of prepares to fight an entire village to get Fleur's sisters free. And then he has to drag them both. He has to swim with them both all the way back to the top of the lake, which is no small feat. His gills transform before he can get to the top. His webbed feet and hands are no longer webbed. He kicks and he's out of air, but eventually he breaches the top of the surface and he takes an enormous breath, and he's brought both of them up to the top with him. Ron wakes up when they hit the surface of the water and he's like, what did you bring her for? And Harry says, the clue said whatever wasn't found would be lost forever. And Ron's like, Harry, you didn't really think that Dumbledore would let somebody die, did you? I hope you didn't waste time acting like a hero. But the history books and Dumbledore and JKR keep telling us that children die in these games. And so Harry really did think that she would have died. And Harry's like, God damn it, I did waste time down there. I just sat there waiting forever. All the students are pulled out of the lake and attended to by Madame Pomfrey. And Fleur explains about the Grindylows, whom some mer people keep as dogs. Apparently, they were enough to deter her from being able to finish the task. And it's just such a frustrating show. She couldn't finish. Anyway, she's very grateful to Ron and Harry for saving her sister, and she gives them both kisses on the cheek, which apparently Hermione looks quite furious about. Ron will tell and retell the story of being at the bottom of the lake with more and more embellishments each time he tells it, and eventually he gets called out by Hermione for being practically asleep while he was underneath there, and so he stops. So Fleur didn't finish this task, and she came in last in the previous task, and it's really looking like she's the weakest competitor here, and Harry is 14. Crumb is trying to get Hermione's attention while she talks to Harry. Crumb says, you have a water beetle in your hair. She says that he came back ages after the time limit. Did it take him a really long time to find them? Harry's like, nope. That's not what happened. Meanwhile, Dumbledore is crouched at the water's edge, talking with merperson leadership about what went on down in their square. They're filling him in on the altercation with Harry. Fleur is eventually awarded 25 points, which she says she shouldn't have gotten any points because she didn't finish. Cedric, whom was the first back and only a minute outside of the time limit, is awarded 47 points. Crumb, with his incomplete but effective transfiguration, is awarded 40 points. And Harry, whose attempted heroics are the reason that he didn't come in first place, is awarded 45 points for great character and moral fiber, thereby tying him for first place with Cedric Diggory. Ron is like, Harry, yes! You weren't being thick, you were showing moral fiber. This makes sense to me for two reasons. One, it has been life or death at the end of every year for Harry up until this point. He hasn't really competed in a challenge where the stakes aren't that high. And two, Dumbledore needs to condition and reward Harry for sacrificing himself for saving other people. So, makes sense. The champions are all told that the next and final task will be on June 24th, and that the champions will be given more information about what that task might be 1 month prior. Harry walks back to the castle, having once again made it through a task by the skin of his teeth and come out in first place. He was able to complete the task, having made it with the help from the good folks of Book 2, and he thinks next time he's in Hogsmeade, he's gonna buy Dobby a pair of socks for every day of the year. Harry says one of the best things about this task is that Ron got to share a lot of the limelight in the aftermath. Hermione, on the other hand, is being teased a lot for being picked as the person that Victor Crumb would miss the most. And she's not super excited about Ron's embellishments, and that's why she calls him out. They receive more word from Sirius, and he tells them that he's going to meet them at Hogsmeade, and can they please bring extra food. The kids are super worried about Sirius being this close to Hogsmeade. Coming this close to the Hogwarts castle is perhaps really ill-advised. It's an enormous risk, but one that Sirius obviously feels is worth taking. The news has also been delivered that morning, and Rita Skeeter has written her article about Hermione. The article details the ways that Hermione is cheating on Harry Potter with Victor Crumb. Sources even say that Crumb invited Hermione to visit him this summer in Bulgaria, and that he told her he's never felt this way about a girl before. The article says poor Harry, perhaps famous but still suffers the betrayals of adolescent women. Obviously, Harry isn't enough to satisfy the plain but ambitious girl Hermione. Pansy Parkinson, a source at the school, says Hermione's actually really ugly and very brainy, and Pansy doesn't put it past her to have used a love potion on maybe both boys. Obviously, love potions are banned at Hogwarts, but Skeeter implores Dumbledore to look into the situation. Hermione's like, are you kidding? Ron says, I told you. She made you out to be some sort of Scarlet Woman. And Hermione's like, Scarlet Woman? And then she's like, how did she know that? That he asked me to come to visit him in Bulgaria and that he said he's never felt this way before. And Ron is like, what did you say? And she's like, she wasn't anywhere in the stands and she would have had to have been kind of close to overhear that. And Ron's like, what did you say in potions that day? This is despicable. Snape reads the article out loud to the entire class. Snape reminds Harry that he doesn't care that other people are convinced he's this champion and good guy. He knows that Harry Potter's nothing but a nasty little boy who thinks the rules are beneath him. And he accuses Harry of stealing the gillyweed and some boomslang skin from his office. Harry, who'd been feigning deafness so as not to be goaded into this fight with his teacher, is like, I didn't break into your office. And then he tells us that he really didn't, because it was Hermione that broke into Snape's office in second year and Dobby that broke into Snape's office right now. So Harry's not responsible for this. Snape threatens to use Veritaserum on Harry. It's a truth potion that results in the drinker spilling honestly to any question they've been asked without any discernment. And my question is, if Veritaserum exists, how is there anyone in Azkaban who is innocent? Why aren't we using this? And it doesn't have to be compulsory, right? Maybe it doesn't mean that if you're accused of a crime, you have to drink the Veritaserum. It doesn't have to be a piece of the law, but maybe it's something you could opt into. Maybe Sirius could have had a chance to, like, if Sirius can be given Veritaserum and no one can doubt that he's telling the truth, why does he have to be on the run? Why is Wormtail the only person that can clear his name? This doesn't make any sense. That's not the only thing, too. There's another device in this book that we will get to in moments. Couldn't Sirius have then said, give me Veritaserum, I'll tell you what happened? Or couldn't he even be doing that now? Whatever. Karkaroff interrupts Snape's class, and he's kind of hot and bothered, and he says, we need to talk. Never a good thing to hear. After class, Harry spills some of his potion ingredients on the floor so that he can have a legitimate reason to stay behind and listen to what Karkaroff and Snape have to say. It's a very similar conversation to the one he overheard at the Yule ball, with Karkaroff saying that Snape cannot ignore this any longer. Potter, what are you doing? Cleaning up my armadillo bile, sir. And Harry holds up like a rag for proof. On Saturday, they load their bags up with food from the breakfast table and they head out to Hogsmeade. First, they stop at a clothing store to buy Dobby a bunch of socks, and they do. They buy Dobby just like tons of socks with really cool patterns on them. Then they head to the end of the road to meet Sirius. And they do. They find him in his form of an enormous black dog. He's at the base of a trail and he leads them up a mountain and into a cave. Buckbeak is also in the cave, and after a short assessment, Buckbeak bows to the children and Hermione rushes to Buckbeak and like gives him some strokes. Sirius is still wearing the raggedy gray robes that he was wearing in Azkaban. So can we get this man some clothes? Once human, Sirius yells, "Chicken!" and Harry hands over the food. Sirius says he's been mostly living on rats in his dog form, and that it's nice to hang out in Hogsmeade because everyone thinks he's a lovable stray. No one but Dumbledore and these kids know that he's an animagus. He brushes off Harry's concern about security. They work through all they know with Sirius, about Winky being fired, about Barty not being himself, and then being so absent at work despite his reputation for always being at work, about Harry's wand getting lost, and then the conjuring of the mark. They discuss Bagman and his interest in helping Harry in the tournament. Sirius is really interested in Barty's sacking of the house elf Winky. Hermione says it wasn't right, and she launches into her tirade about elf rights, and Ron says, seriously, Hermione, come off of it. But then Sirius says, no, she's got the measure of it, Ron. If you want to know what a man is like, take a look at how he treats his inferiors, not his equals. And the fandom really clung to that line and stuck with it. And on its face, like much of the book, it appears to be a message of love and light. You should be treating everyone with love and respect, even people that are beneath you. But if you scratch the surface, it implies a world where there are superiors and inferiors. It implies a world of hierarchy amongst creatures. And that's not that cool. But I do like the messaging that you should treat everyone with kindness and respect, regardless of whether or not they work for you. Sirius reveals that Barty Crouch is the person who sent him to Azkaban without a trial. Again, how could this possibly happen? How could that happen? But I guess it was a time of extreme chaos and mass death, and so the government was just doing what it'd be doing. But Crouch used to be the head of magical law enforcement. Sirius says Barty Crouch was a powerful wizard and a power-hungry wizard. Never on the dark side, though. In fact, he made most of his political rise to power by pursuing justice against dark wizards. Sirius says maybe they can't understand what it was like because of their youth. And Ron says, you know, my dad says that too, but maybe you could just tell us. And Sirius says, okay, well, in the old days, there was a lot of suspicion around everyone and anyone. You couldn't possibly know who was on the dark side, but even so, there were many people who'd been put under the Imperious curse and forced to do horrific things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And again, the aftermath of that, of the people that were put under the Imperious curse and that would likely have the memories of themselves being forced to torture people they love or betray loved ones or inform on their friends, they never explore the aftermath of that trauma of being implicated in something that you didn't choose to be implicated in, being a person who did harm without your consent. Your body still did that harm, right? You're still accountable. The people around you still witness you do the horrific thing. Your body is still responsible for the horror that was done. And we never really talk about the aftermath of that, which is interesting. Crouch's principles led to his rise in the ministry, and he started ordering very harsh punishments for supporters of the Dark Lord or people suspected of supporting the Dark Lord. He fought violence with violence and authorized Aurors to use unforgivable curses on suspects. Sirius says that Crouch's methods seemed to him as cruel and useless as the Death Eaters. But at the time, Crouch had his supporters, people that felt a tough-on-crime approach was the only way to maintain their safety. When Voldy disappeared, Crouch rose to power even further, and it looked like Crouch was a shoo-in for the Ministry of Magic, until Crouch's own son was accused of being a Death Eater, of the worst kind. Sirius says that was a nasty shock for Barty. Perhaps he should have left the office more and got to know his son. And I don't know how I feel about this, about Barty's culpability as it relates to his son's turn to violence. Is it Dad's fault? Is it? We can't know because we weren't in their home, but it's kind of a mean thing to say, I think. Anyway, there wasn't a ton of evidence that his son was certainly guilty of the crimes that he was charged of, but he was found in the company of people that Sirius says he'd bet his life are definitely Death Eaters. He was found in the company of the Lestranges. Sirius says it's possible, though, that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, like Winky. Sirius says Crouch's son ruined Barty's reputation. He had spent his entire life pursuing this position. It undermined his dedication to justice, undermined his authority, undermined his intentions, and certainly ruined his bid for minister. Sirius says Barty hated his son, and I don't know if that's true or if it's just like Sirius's take. Crouch gave his son a trial, and when the evidence condemned him, he sent his own son to Azkaban for life, and his son wasn't 19 at the time. Sirius was in prison with Barty Crouch's son and says that Crouch's son was screaming for his mother by the end of the first night. He died about a year after they brought him in. Sirius says that's not uncommon though, because plenty of people lose the will to live in Azkaban. Crouch, being an important ministry member, was allowed a deathbed visit in Azkaban. The last time he saw Barty Crouch, he was half carrying his wife past Sirius's cell. She died shortly after that visit as well. After the chaos, violence, and fear of Voldemort's reign had died down, people started asking how Crouch's son, a young boy from a nice family, could have gone so wrong. People blamed Crouch for his son's defection from forces of good, and then they blamed him for his death. They blamed Crouch for punishing his son so harshly, even though at the time that's what they had been screaming for. Sirius guesses that the ordeal was with Winky brought back some of these memories of his own dependent condemning him in the eyes of the public. This prompts the kids to discuss Snape and why Barty Crouch was feigning ill and then searching Snape's office in the dead of night. And why not judge the tournament if he really is so suspicious of Snape? It's an excuse to be around. Hermione says, if we trust Dumbledore, we have to trust Snape. And Ron says, I don't think so. Hermione says, why did he save Harry during first year then? And Ron says, maybe to make us not suspicious. Sirius says, I hear both points. And he was surprised when he found out that Snape worked for the school. In fact, when he was at school, Snape arrived his first year knowing more hexes and curses than most 7th years did. And his gang of friends turned out to nearly all be Death Eaters. But as far as Sirius knows, Snape has never even been accused of being a Death Eater. The kids mention Karkaroff and how he showed Snape something on his arm. And Snape's like, something on his arm. And we're meant to believe that Sirius has no idea what that could possibly be. So no one knows about the dark marks up until this point. It's not common knowledge. They discuss Bertha Jorkins and how the paper is making her out to be extremely forgetful and how the paper is blaming her for her own disappearance. Sirius says that's not how he remembers Bertha Jorkins though. Says she's always been a gossip. It got her in trouble a lot. She's a bit dim, but she actually has an excellent memory. And there's a reason for this confusion. There's a reason that Bagman thinks Bertha doesn't have a good memory and Barty knows she does. It's because Barty Crouch put a very powerful memory charm on Bertha Jorkins and it changed who she was, essentially. So now her current boss thinks she's forgetful. So Barty has done a lot of damage. The afternoon dwindles away and Sirius tells them that they better be getting back to the castle. Harry's watch is broken since he spent an hour at the bottom of the lake. Sirius tells them to send correspondence to this cave. He's gonna hide out here until the tournament's over, and they should call him Snuffles when they talk amongst themselves. The kids hit the Owlery on the way back to the castle to send a letter to Percy to kind of carefully inquire about Barty Crouch's condition. And then they go down to the kitchens to give Dobby his new present, which he receives ecstatically. Harry thanks Dobby for saving his life, Dobby's first successful attempt at saving Harry, and certainly not his last. The kids inquire about Winky, and Dobby motions to her. She's sitting by the fire, and she is filthy. She apparently goes through 6 bottles of butterbeer a day. It's not strong for the kids, but for the House-elves' tiny bodies, it's doing a lot of damage. She's basically drunk all the time. Dobby says Winky is pining. Like, these are the words that are being chosen. She wants to go home to her master, Barty Crouch. She isn't accepting that her new master is Dumbledore. Winky, between hiccups, tells the kids that Crouch needs her. Winky is keeping his most important secret, and she's really surprised to hear that Barty Crouch is ill. Without warning, Winky falls asleep and slips off her stool onto the floor, and the other house elves immediately attend to her. They cover her with a checkered picnic blanket and tuck in the sides, and they clear out the bottles, and they're like, please don't judge all of us on Winky. And Hermione says, of course not, she's just unhappy. They say Winky has no right to unhappiness, not when there's work to be done and a master to serve. And Hermione says, well, wait, look at Dobby. He's happy and he's free. And Dobby is like, excuse me, miss, please do not bring me into this. And as Hermione is talking about freedom and agency and independence, the house elves start to regard her as a sort of dangerous creature or wild animal. And they bring the kids all of this extra food and then they politely kick them out of the kitchen. And that is due to Hermione's rhetoric about unionizing, ultimately. Dobby thanks them from behind an army of house elves for the socks. Thank you for the socks, Harry Potter. From the window of the castle, Harry sees Hagrid working on some sort of vegetable patch, and he sees Madame Maxine approach him, and Hagrid looks like he doesn't even look up at her. He kind of brushes her off. Hermione has taken out a subscription to the Daily Prophet because she's sick of getting all of her news from the Slytherins, but she receives a bunch of other mail that morning too. A bunch of it is hate mail. She gets a bunch of letters insisting that Harry Potter can do better than her, that she's a wicked girl that doesn't deserve Harry Potter. And in one envelope, she opens a bunch of undiluted Bubbo-tubber pus, and it makes her hands swell up, and she has to run to Madame Pomfrey. She's being slut-shamed by Rita Skeeter, and it's not true or real, and the people of the wizarding world are spending their time and money to reprimand her for her romantic choices that she's literally not even making. In Care of Magical Creatures, Hagrid introduces the students to Nifflers. They're little cuddly treasure hunters. Hagrid has buried leprechaun gold all throughout the garden, and each of the students is meant to choose a Niffler to represent them, and whoever's Niffler finds the most gold will win a prize. The kids have to take off all their valuables before they interact with the Nifflers, otherwise the Nifflers would steal it, and then they get started. Ron's Niffler does the best. Ron is like, can you get these as pets? Like, I gotta get myself a treasure hunting pet. And Hagrid's like, you wouldn't want one as a pet. It will wreck your house. But they are quite cuddly, like I said. Hagrid reprimands Goyle for trying to steal some of the leprechaun gold. He says there's no use anyway. It'll disappear after a few hours. Ron wins a big bar of Honeyduke's chocolate because his Niffler had collected the most coins. And Hermione joins the end of the lesson, and her and Hagrid commiserate about the hate mail that they've both been receiving. And the kids walk back up to the castle. Ron seems really down, despite what was perhaps their most fun lesson ever. And Harry asks him what's up. And Ron was like, why didn't you tell me? Harry's like, tell you what. Ron says about leprechaun gold disappearing. You bought me omnoculars and a Christmas present, and I thought I paid you back, but it was leprechaun gold. It must have disappeared. And Harry's like, oh, honestly, he didn't even notice it was gone. Harry has so much money. And to be fair, there was quite a bit of commotion that night, and what with the missing wand and whatnot, it makes sense that this wasn't top of mind. Missing wand and the riot, Harry didn't notice that a pocket full of gold went missing. I hate being poor, says Ron. And neither Harry nor Hermione know what to say because they are both rich. Hermione is trying to manage her silverware, and she's like, well, at least your fingers aren't full of pus. I hate that Skeeter woman. How is she managing to get all this information? Hate mail continues to arrive for Hermione for weeks and weeks. Several folks send howlers, which are imbued with a person's screaming voice, and if you don't open them yourself, they explode in a rage. And so Hermione, every morning at breakfast, is screeched at in front of her entire school for being a slut by random strangers. That's so humiliating. That's awful. Ron says maybe Skeeter has the school bugged. And Hermione's like, why are you guys so dumb? Of course the school isn't bugged. Technology doesn't work here. Read Hogwarts a History. And the boys are like, don't we have enough to worry about? Like, why do you care how Skeeter's getting this information? And Hermione's like, you know what? I'm not asking you for your help. Whatever. And I'm a little betrayed on her behalf because Hermione really comes through every single year for every single person around her. She is always helping. And right now, she is sustaining a lot of abuse from the people in her life and people outside of it. People are making fun of her for Victor liking her. People are insisting that Victor doesn't actually like her. People are accusing her of using a love potion and ultimately being a predator, tricking Victor into liking her. And now Ron is telling her that it's her fault that all of this has happened to her because she provoked Rita Skeeter. And that seems pretty similar to all the other rhetoric going on in the book, doesn't it? Anyway, Hermione always goes out of her way to help people, and now that she's the one that's under it, everyone's like, who cares? Just shrug it off. Whatever. Moody's classes are getting more and more difficult as the year goes on, and students find themselves eager to leave those classes. In his last test, he hexed so many children that most of them left nursing injuries, which is like big red flags everywhere. But they've grown to trust him, so they let him hurt them. So sad. Easter happens, and Harry and Ron receive enormous egg Easter baskets from Mrs. Weasley. But Hermione receives this like really tiny egg. And she's like, Ron, your mom doesn't read Witches Weekly, does she? And Ron says, yeah, she does, for the recipes. And so Mrs. Weasley has bought Rita Skeeter's garbage about Hermione, despite being the first person in the book to tell us that we don't trust Rita Skeeter. Not my Molly Weasley. Hashtag justice for Mrs. Weasley. They receive a letter back from Percy, and he seems really haggard. He's like, don't pester me. No, I haven't personally seen Barty Crouch in a while, but he sends me owls, and I can obviously be trusted to identify my own boss's handwriting. Don't bother me anymore. 1 month before the final task is set to take place, McGonagall tells Harry and the other champions to head down to the Quidditch pitch at 9 p.m. The Quidditch field, much to Cedric and Harry's horror, has been transformed into a hedge maze, which only Crumb is able to identify it as a maze. None of the other champions get it. The Triwizard Cup will be placed at the center of the maze, and the first to the cup will win the Triwizard Tournament. Cedric and Harry will be allowed to enter the maze first because they are currently in first place. They'll be followed by Crumb, and lastly by Fleur Delacour. As the kids head back up to the castle, Crumb asks Harry for a private word, and he takes him sort of to the edge of the grounds because he doesn't want to be overheard. Because he's also embarrassed by Rita Skeeter's writing, right? He asks Harry straight up, he's like, what's going on with you and Hermione? What's going on between you and Hermione? Harry says nothing. She's not my girlfriend and she never has been. And he doesn't say and she never will be, but it's pretty implied. That's the vibe. Crumb is like, she talks about you all the time and she sure does spend a lot of time with you. And Harry's like, yeah, that's because we're really good friends, but there's nothing going on between us. Harry is shocked to be having this conversation with Victor Crumb because Crumb is talking to him like they are equals, like they are competitors for the same girl. And Krum, who is this super famous international Quidditch champion, is looking at him like he's a romantic rival. And it makes Harry feel like kind of confident. He's like, all right. Krum seems slightly happier with this information now that he knows he's not competing for Hermione. And he tells Harry that he flies really well, that he was watching during the first task. And Harry's like, oh my God, thank you. I saw you at the World Cup final and your Wronski Fent is unbelievable. But just at that moment, something strange happens behind the tree line. And all of a sudden, a very disgruntled looking Barty Crouch comes running out of the forest. His robes are ripped and bloody and his face is scratched and he seems gray with exhaustion. He seems really unbalanced or maybe not grounded in reality. At some point, he starts talking to a tree and calling it Weatherby. He seems very confused. And then at other points, he's almost choking on his words, insisting that he's done something wrong and he needs to speak to Dumbledore right now. And then he snaps out of it and he speaks calmly to the tree again. When Crouch is most lucid and choking, he seems extremely panicked and like there's something really urgent that needs to take place, urging the boys to go get Dumbledore. Harry tells Krum to stay with Crouch and he runs to get Dumbledore. He arrives outside of the Trickstone staircase that needs a password to get to Dumbledore's office. Harry tries Lemon Drop, which is the previous password that worked, but the gargoyle doesn't budge. He thinks maybe Dumbledore's in the staff room, and so he takes off running down the hallway and he runs into Snape, who holds him up. Snape scolds him and tells him that Dumbledore doesn't have time for whatever Harry's trying to tell him. And if Snape hadn't stopped Harry here, if Snape had helped Harry get to Dumbledore, we don't know what would have happened next. We don't know if this book ends really differently. But Snape doesn't. Harry is forced to start explaining to Snape what he has just seen with Krum and Crouch and why it's an urgent situation. At that time, Dumbledore comes out of his office. He says, "Is there a problem, Harry?" And Harry says it's Crouch. He's not right. And Dumbledore asks him to take him to Crouch immediately. And so the two of them walk down to the bottom of the grounds where Krum and Crouch used to be. Harry fills Dumbledore in on the way there. But when they arrive at the spot, Mr. Crouch is gone. Krum is unconscious on the floor. Dumbledore reverberates Krum, who has been stunned, and Krum says the old man attacked him, stunned him when he looked to see where Harry had gone. Moody comes limping out of the woods, says Snape sent him, and Hagrid fetches Karkaroff because his student has just been attacked. Karkaroff shows up and he says, "Crouch attacked you? Treachery! The Triwizard Judge attacked my student. I've been lured into this country under false pretenses." He says all this garbage about letting bygones be bygones and the past is the past and forgetting our differences and rebuilding old ties. Here's what I think of you. And he spits at Dumbledore, and Hagrid grabs Karkaroff and lifts him up by the collar and says, "Apologize right now." And Dumbledore says, "No, Hagrid, put him down. Please escort Harry back to the castle. Take him straight to his common room, and Harry, any letters that you're thinking of writing tonight, please just wait until the morning." While Hagrid is walking Harry back up to the castle, Hagrid is chastising Harry for being alone with Krum. Hagrid says, "You can't trust the foreigners, they're all the same." Harry's like, "No, Krum didn't want to hurt me. He just wanted to talk to me about Hermione." Hagrid says, "Well, I'll be talking to her too. The less you lot have to do with the foreigners, the better. Can't trust any of them." That's just so typical. The hypocrisy, I just find at this moment in political history extremely typical. Frustrating, I don't have time for it. The days go on with the kids chewing on this new Crouch information. Much of the wizarding world is looking for the missing head of their department. Harry goes over and over this very strange interaction with Hermione and Ron. How Crouch had mentioned Bertha Jorkins and seemed to think she was dead. And Crouch, as he was talking about it, seemed to think he was responsible for Bertha Jorkins' death. Crouch had been talking about some terrible thing that he had done, this thing that he needed to confess to Dumbledore, and he was talking as if his son was still alive. The kids consult Moody after class one day, and Moody says there was no one on the Marauders map. He checked. He tells Hermione that she ought to think about becoming an Auror when she demonstrates her powers of deduction in front of him. And Moody says that this last task should be cake for Harry because doesn't he do something like this assortment of challenges every single year? And Ron is like, "Yeah, but we usually help." Harry gets a letter from Sirius scolding him for going off the Hogwarts grounds with the Durmstrang champion. And Harry is like, where does he get off scolding me for wandering around after all that he did? And I get it. When you've spent your life unparented and someone tries to parent you, you just don't respond that kindly to it. You're like, "I've been doing it myself up until now, and I'll keep at it. Thanks." Sirius tells Harry that he ought to be practicing some hexes and spells for this last maze challenge. The kids practice for the third task, and it does involve some sacrifices on Ron and Hermione's part, because to practice hexing someone, you have to hex somebody. And Ron suggests that they get Mrs. Norris, but that doesn't feel right, so they set a bunch of pillows on the floor, and Ron and Hermione take turns being like clumsily hexed by Harry. And McGonagall gets tired of finding like these students passed out in these empty classrooms, and so she offers them her classroom after hours to practice, which I think is cool. McGonagall is mentioned only in the periphery in this book, but every time she is, she's a great help. It's a warm June day, and Harry is sitting in divination, and it's really, really hot in the tower because Trelawney always has a fire going, and it sounds like there are lots of incense burning, and she is droning on about the planets as usual, and so Harry's not really paying attention, and he's also sleeping less than ever because he's preparing for the third task, so he accidentally falls asleep in class. Harry dreams that he's flying on the back of an eagle, and that eagle takes him into the Riddle House and up the hallway, and suddenly he's witness again to another scene between Voldemort and Wormtail. Voldemort is scolding Wormtail for his incompetence and for making a huge mistake, and Voldemort puts the Cruciatus curse, the torturing curse, on Wormtail in that moment. Harry comes to, rolling on the floor of the divination classroom, screaming in pain, the pain behind his forehead, clutching his scar. Ron is kneeling next to him, trying to wake him up. All the students in Trelawney are looking at him with deep concern, and Trelawney suggests that Harry has had a premonition, and she asks him to open up about it to them. She knows about these things, but Harry doesn't bother with the rest of the class and immediately runs to Dumbledore's office. Once outside of Dumbledore's office, he has to spend a few minutes trying to guess the password, and eventually he does guess correctly. It's cockroach clusters. And on his way up from behind Dumbledore's closed door, he hears Dumbledore, Moody, and Minister of Magic Cornelius Fudge having a conversation about the missing Barty Crouch and the altercation that has taken place between Crumb, Crouch, and Harry. The minister is saying that he doesn't think Jerkin's disappearance is at all related to Barty Crouch's. And he says that all the more likely, given Crouch's personal history, Crouch just finally cracked and lost it, and he wandered off somewhere. Dumbledore says he would have had to wander off really quickly. Fudge says, but what about Madame Maxine? Isn't her carriage parked right outside the edge of the grounds? Does Dumbledore know what that woman is? Dumbledore says he knows her to be a very capable headmistress and an excellent dancer. And Fudge says, come on, Dumbledore. Don't you think that perhaps you're prejudiced in her favor because of Hagrid? Dumbledore says, I think it's more likely that it's you who's prejudiced, Minister. And Moody says, can we wrap this up because Potter's outside the door and he'd like a word with the professor. The office door opens and Harry is greeted by the sight of Moody, Cornelius Fudge, and Dumbledore. Cornelius Fudge says, hi, Harry, and Harry says, yeah, hi, couldn't help but overhear, and I gotta say, I don't think Madame Maxine is implicated at all because she would have had a real job hiding if it had been her, wouldn't she have? And Dumbledore smiles at him. Fudge looks pretty embarrassed to have just been told off or scolded by this 14-year-old who, up until now, he's probably like commended himself on knowing. When we're in Harry's head, it's easy to forget who he is to the wizarding world because, you know, for obvious reasons, but Harry is ultimately a war hero, the most famous war hero, and to tell off the Minister of Magic may have looked like disrespect to, you know, an insecure person. Fudge says, hey, well, we're about to go walk the grounds, so Harry, maybe you should just go back to class. And Harry says, actually, Professor Dumbledore, I really need to speak with you. And so Dumbledore tells Harry to wait in his office until he gets back. And Harry sits down in Dumbledore's office and feels significantly calmer now that he knows he's going to have an audience with the headmaster. Harry is looking around Dumbledore's office when he notices some silvery light coming out of this cabinet on the wall. And in the movie, they make it totally an accident that Harry stumbles upon the pensieve, but in the book, Harry's a rule breaker, and in the book, there's just this little glow of the light, and Harry decides to investigate. So he goes and he opens the headmaster's cupboards of his own volition. Movie Harry would never, but no. Harry decides to investigate this. And what he sees inside of there is a shallow stone basin with something inside of it, and Harry can't discern whether or not it's liquid or gas. He can't decide what exactly he's looking at. When he prods at it with the tip of his wand, the stuff inside the basin starts to swirl really quickly, and it starts to form a scene that Harry wants to see. So he tilts his face closer towards it, and he's looking and he's looking and he's looking. As soon as his nose touches the water, he falls forward into what is ultimately Dumbledore's memory. He lands in a courtroom of sorts. It seems very dreary, and in the middle of the courtroom is this chair covered in chains. The chair itself has a really ominous vibe to it. The room is dimly lit, and it seems like it might even be underground. There are no windows, and just torches and brackets illuminating the room. Harry sees rows and rows of witches and wizards sitting around this empty torture chair. Harry is sure that he's not in Hogwarts right now, but he doesn't know where he is. None of the other witches and wizards in the room that he's sitting in seem to have noticed that a 14-year-old boy has just dropped from the sky. Harry turns to the wizard next to him and shouts in surprise, "Professor Dumbledore! Professor! I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." But he did mean to. He's like, "I was just looking at the basin in your cabinet and where are we?" But Dumbledore doesn't respond. He seems to not perceive Harry at all. And this reminds Harry a lot of what it was like to be inside of Tom Riddle's memory when he was interacting with the diary in Chamber of Secrets. So he understands that he's fallen into a place in history or a previous time. He knows that Dumbledore wouldn't just ignore him like that. This is not present-day Dumbledore. Soon the dungeon door opens and a man is pulled into the room, flanked by 2 Dementors. Harry looks at the man who's been placed in the chair with all of the chains, and it's Professor Karkaroff. But he looks significantly younger. His goatee and his hair are black. The chains of the chair snake their way up Karkaroff's arms and imprison him in the center of the circle. "Igor Karkaroff," says a past version of Barty Crouch. "You have been brought from Azkaban to present evidence to the Ministry. We understand that you believe you have important information for us." Karkaroff seems terrified. He says, "I have, sir. I wish to be of use to the Ministry. I wish to help. I know that the Ministry is trying to round up the last of the Dark Lord's supporters, and I am eager to assist in any way that I can." There's a murmur around the benches, some in approval, some in dissent. From Dumbledore's other side, whispered really distinctly, Harry hears the word filth. And he looks and he sees a much younger Mad-Eye Moody. It's a Mad-Eye Moody that has both of his original eyes and a lot of his nose, I think. Crouch is going to let him out. Moody says, "Done a deal with him. Took me 6 months to track him down, and Crouch is going to let him go if he can name some names." A younger Moody says, "I keep forgetting. You don't like Dementors, do you, Dumbledore?" And Dumbledore says, "No, I think it's crazy to ally ourselves with such dark creatures." "But for filth like this," says Moody. Karkaroff tells the court, I guess, that everyone has to understand that he who must not be named was very secretive as it related to his inner circle. No one person knew everyone who was involved. He preferred that we, I mean to say his supporters, I regret now that I ever counted myself among them. And Crouch is like, "Okay, name some names." You said you have some names? "I do. These were important supporters. People I saw with my own eyes do his bidding. I give this information to prove that I fully renounce my allegiance to the Dark Lord, and I am so filled with remorse that I can barely..." "The names," says Crouch. Karkaroff names a few names, and Crouch dismisses most of them. And Karkaroff is starting to become desperate because if his information isn't useful, he's going to go back to Azkaban. Eventually, he names Rookwood. "Rookwood," says Mr. Crouch. "Augustus Rookwood of the Department of Mysteries?" "The very same," says Karkaroff eagerly. "I believe he used a network of well-placed wizards, both inside the Ministry and out to collect information. We'll take this information into consideration, and in the meantime, you'll hang out at Azkaban." And Karkaroff says, "Wait, I have more. What about Snape? Severus Snape?" "Snape has been cleared by this council," says Crouch. "He has been vouched for by Albus Dumbledore." "No," says Karkaroff. "I assure you, Snape is a Death Eater." Dumbledore stands up. "I have already given evidence on this matter. Severus Snape was indeed a Death Eater. He rejoined our side before Lord Voldemort's downfall and turned spy for us, at great personal risk. He is now no more a Death Eater than I am." And my question is, if Dumbledore can vouch for Snape with zero evidence to the contrary, why can't he vouch for Sirius? Also, if a pensieve exists and we can live inside of other people's memories, why can't Sirius put some of his memories into the pensieve and have people look? And obviously, right, the events of the next few books will illuminate for us that you can technically trick a pensieve. My understanding is that if you believed a memory to have happened, you could show people inside of a pensieve. But there also seems to be ways to tell when a memory has been tampered with. So I'm just saying, between the Veritas Serum, Dumbledore's trust, and perhaps a pensieve, does Sirius really need to be surviving on rats in dog form? I don't know. I don't know. It illuminates for Harry that these are what these trials looked like. They were very serious, and the evidence that was given is really just a tracing back of different connections. Karkaroff is transported back to Azkaban while he pleads. That particular memory fades away, and Harry has this new information. One, that Snape was indeed a Death Eater, and admittedly so by Albus Dumbledore, but two, Snape turned to the side of light before Voldemort's downfall, and that Dumbledore has been vouching for him ever since. Three, that the word of Dumbledore means so much that it doesn't matter that Karkaroff, a current Death Eater, can cite Severus Snape, who saw no prison time. They don't even blink an eye. They're just like, hey, I've already given evidence on this matter. We don't have to talk about this. The next memory they see is of a significantly lighter trial. In fact, it's the trial of Ludo Bagman. Ludo Bagman is clearly in this memory at the height of his Quidditch playing fitness. Again, we're hearing about another man's body. He's tall and lean and muscular. He looks nervous as he sits down in the chained chair, but the chains don't snake his way around his arms or anything. It's clear that Bagman is not being considered a real threat. Apparently, Ludo Bagman was caught passing information to one of Lord Voldemort's supporters, and Crouch is suggesting a term of imprisonment in Azkaban as a consequence for passing that information. Several of the witches and wizards that are sitting in the courtroom let out a cry of disbelief. They don't think that Bagman should be punished. Bagman tells them that he had no idea what he was doing was passing information to dark wizards, and I guess he has enough plausible deniability that it is decided that not only will he not do a stint in Azkaban, but he will eventually, one day, be the head of a department, despite the fact that he's not credentialed at all. So that's an interesting little memory. It actually was Rookwood that Ludo Bagman had been passing information to, and so it makes sense, given that Karkaroff only illuminated that Rookwood was a Death Eater in his own trial, that other Ministry wizards would be reluctant to put Bagman in prison for something that they themselves might have done. They vote and they decide that Bagman is not going to go to Azkaban. One of the witches of the jury stands up and congratulates Bagman on his recent Quidditch successes. So it sounds like it was kind of a fair trial, but it may not necessarily have been done in the name of justice. The dungeon dissolves again, and Harry witnesses his third memory. He and Dumbledore are sitting beside Mr. Crouch, but the atmosphere couldn't be more different than the day of Ludo Bagman's trial. There is total silence, broken only by the sobs of a frail-looking woman next to Barty Crouch. The Dementors bring in 4 people, and there are now 4 chairs in the center of the room. We are introduced for the first time to the Lestranges. We're introduced to Bellatrix Lestrange and her husband, who don't speak much during this trial. Harry notices amongst this crowd of 4 people that are being tried today, a boy in his late teens who looks nothing short of petrified. He's shivering, and his straw-colored hair is all over his face, and his freckled skin is milk white. He's meant to look really young. The witch next to Barty Crouch starts whimpering when he's brought out by the Dementors. The boy, apparently, is Barty Crouch's son. He starts pleading for his father to please save him. These 4 people are accused of capturing an Auror, Frank Longbottom, Neville's dad, and subjecting him to the Cruciatus curse. "Father, I didn't!" shrieks the boy in chains, believing him to have knowledge of the present whereabouts of he who must not be named. "I swear I didn't! Don't send me back there!" They are further accused of using the Cruciatus curse on Frank Longbottom's wife when he would not give them any information. So what we're learning from this memory is that the Lestranges and Barty Crouch Jr., after Harry had defeated the Dark Lord, then decided to torture the Longbottoms. It was after the war that these horrific crimes were committed. They did not have to happen. Barty Crouch is citing the evidence against these 4 people in between the screams and the pleas of his teenage child. "I'm your son!" Mr. Crouch asks the wizards and witches of the jury to raise their hands if they believe, as he does, that these crimes deserve a life sentence in Azkaban. In unison, every witch and wizard in the place raises their hand. So it wasn't just Barty Crouch that condemned his son, it was everyone else in this courtroom. Bellatrix, while being led out of the room, tells them very calmly that she is happy to wait in Azkaban because the Dark Lord will rise again. And she's right. She says, "We alone were faithful. We alone tried to find him." "I'm your son!" "You are no son of mine." "I have no son." And the witch beside Barty Crouch, who is Barty Crouch Jr.'s mom, gives a gasp and a sigh, and she slumps in her seat. She faints. "I wasn't involved! Father, I wasn't involved!" I think, Harry, "It's time to return to my office," says the voice of present-day Dumbledore in Harry's ear. He puts his hand on Harry's elbow, and they return to Dumbledore's office. "Professor," says Harry, "I know I shouldn't have. The cabinet door was kind of open, and I checked." And Dumbledore says, "I quite understand." He says, "This is called a pensieve. Sometimes I find that I have too many thoughts crammed around in my head, and I have to take them out one at a time and look at them." And I, for the longest time, thought this was the most amazing, wonderful thing. Can you imagine you could just pull out your memories and then watch them sort of from any perspective, any angle of the room, how much more of a grasp you'd have on your reality, how much more perspective you'd have. You could look at everything that you didn't look at when you actually experienced it in that moment. This is like an amazing creation. But then I've also seen Black Mirror, and so I know that, you know, I have been warned. Harry's like, "So you mean to say the stuff swirling around in there are your thoughts?" And Dumbledore says, "Yes." And Dumbledore pulls a thought out of his head and puts it into the pensieve. What Dumbledore has just put into the pensieve is a memory of Snape telling Dumbledore that Karkaroff's is coming back too, stronger than ever. Dumbledore tells Harry that curiosity is not a sin, but it's important to exercise caution, because Dumbledore needs Harry to be curious and to follow clues and to gather information and to be able to make connections on his own. There's also a memory that Harry witnesses of Dumbledore talking to Bertha Jorkins. Bertha Jorkins, I guess when she was at Hogwarts, was known for collecting gossip and following people around, and then teasing them for their whereabouts. I don't know if that's what she was known for. That's just what we see in this one memory. And the word gossip is thrown around with such disdain in this book, and I think that's so interesting because we see both sides of it like we do in most of JKR's books. On the one hand, you have Winky, who refuses to tell her master's secrets, and she's looked at with a sort of pity for not divulging and for thinking that it matters whether or not she tells this information. And on the other hand, we have Bertha Jorkins, who knows why she was following some guy around the bush and watching him kiss Florence. Maybe Florence is her best friend. Maybe the guy she was following is supposed to be kissing her. Maybe he's cheating. I don't know what it is. I don't know why Bertha Jorkins is following people around or why she's a gossip, but she is punished so heavily in this book. Dumbledore says, "Yeah, that was Bertha's. I remember her at school." Anyway, Dumbledore says, "So this dream, have you had any others between now and the start of the school year?" And Harry's like, "Oh, how'd you know about that?" And Dumbledore says, "You are not Sirius's only correspondent. It was I who suggested the mountainside cave." Dumbledore shares his theory that the reason that Harry's scar hurts is when Voldemort is, yes, near Harry, but also when Voldemort is feeling particularly murderous. When Voldemort feels a surge of hatred. And Dumbledore says, "The reason that you feel that way is because you are connected by your scar. That's no ordinary scar." Dumbledore shares his theory about what's going on in the wizarding world right now. He says the events and disappearances feel really reminiscent of the last time Voldemort was rising to power. Disappearances marked the start of the coming war. So, Bertha Jorkins has vanished without a trace in the last known place that Voldemort was known to be. Also, the Ministry doesn't consider it of any importance, but Frank Bryce lived in the village where Voldemort's father grew up, and he has not been seen since last August. These disappearances seem to me to be linked. Before Harry leaves, he says, "Can I ask you about what I saw in the courtroom?" And Dumbledore says, "Sure." With Barty Crouch Jr., were they talking about Neville's parents? And Dumbledore gives Harry a look. Has Neville never told you why he doesn't live with his parents? Why he lives with his grandmother? And Harry is like, "Oh my god, how could I have failed to ask Neville this most basic question? As an orphan myself, we lived in the same room for 4 years now, and he has not once inquired about the personal life of his roommate." Dumbledore says yes. Neville's father, Frank, was an Auror, much like Moody, and him and his wife were tortured for information about Voldemort's whereabouts after you defeated him. But they are not dead. The Longbottoms are currently at St. Mungo's. They are insane. I believe Neville visits them with his grandmother during the holidays, but they do not recognize him. The Longbottoms were very popular, says Dumbledore, just when everyone thought they were safe. The attacks caused a wave of fury such as I have never known. And Harry says, "And Bagman? His trial?" And Dumbledore says he's never been accused of any other dark wizardry in the time since. No more than Professor Snape. Harry says, "What really made you think that Snape stopped supporting Voldemort?" And Dumbledore says, "That is a matter between Snape and myself." Dumbledore ushers Harry out of his office and he says, "Please do not speak about Neville's parents to anybody. I believe that that's his right to disclose that information if he chooses to." Then he says, "Good luck with the third task." Harry lies in bed awake that night after disclosing the information that he can to Ron and Hermione. He's thinking a lot about Neville and how he gets a lot of sympathy for being an orphan, but really maybe it's Neville who deserves it. He feels a surge of hatred toward the people that hurt Neville's parents and have in turn hurt Neville. And then he thinks, well, that was only a teenage boy and he died a year later. Who's really to blame is Voldemort. It's Voldemort who's ripping all of these families apart and causing all of this pain. At one point in time, the kids see Malfoy talking into his hand like this, and they were like, it looked like he's using a walkie-talkie. And this leads Hermione to understand that Rita Skeeter is also an unregistered animagus. She can turn into a beetle. The beetle that was in Hermione's hair when Victor Crumb was confessing his feelings. The beetle that was on the reindeer stone when Hagrid was confiding in Madame Maxine. And now Malfoy is like... And Malfoy is now this inside source to Rita Skeeter, the beetle, telling her about the things going on at school. And Hermione figures it out. So what Hermione does is she catches Rita Skeeter. And she keeps her in a jar. And she's like, I'm going to let her out when we get back to London, but she's not going to write about anyone else for a full year, or else I'm going to report on her to the ministry. But we never really get follow-up if Hermione really did let her out. And like, so Rita Skeeter's just like in a jar in the hands of 14-year-old Hermione. And like, that's wild. What leads Hermione to figure it out is the last article that she publishes right before the third task. It's about Harry Potter being disturbed and dangerous. Someone has told Skeeter about Harry collapsing in divination and screaming and rolling on the ground. This whole article talks about how Harry might be doing all of this for attention, how he can speak parcel tongue, how he set the snake in second year on Justin Finch Fletchley, how Harry is friends with werewolves and giants, and perhaps Albus Dumbledore should consider whether or not a boy like Harry Potter is fit to compete in the Triwizard Tournament if all he does is lie for attention and is perhaps even a dark wizard himself. So it's a pretty disparaging article, and it's very demoralizing, but Harry has also received a lot of other good luck letters from Sirius and the like, and he feels really prepared for the task because he knows how to do curses and hexes, and he knows how to think on his feet. The Great Hall empties out, the third task is tonight, and the champions have been told that their families are waiting for them in the Great Hall. But he doesn't really want to go into the chamber because he knows the Dursleys aren't there, he doesn't have any family, so he's just sitting in the Great Hall. When Cedric sticks his head in the door and is like, Harry, come in, they're waiting for you. The people that are waiting for him are Mrs. Weasley and Bill Weasley, and they're like, surprise, we're here to be your family. Thought we'd come and watch you. Bill is like, Charlie wanted to come, but he said you did an amazing job with the Horntail. And like, Harry is being like loved and supported, and he has like adult people here to take care of him. Like, I am so moved by this. Bill and Mrs. Weasley share some of their stories from Hogwarts. Bill asks about Sir Cadogan, and Mrs. Weasley asks about the fat lady who was apparently the gatekeeper for the portrait hole when she was around. She tells a story about her and Arthur wandering around in the middle of the night one night for whatever reason and needing to get back, and it's a cute little insight into the two of them. They ask for the tour of the grounds, and Harry gets to like walk parental figures right around his school, which is so cool. On his way out the door, they pass Amos Diggory, Cedric's dad. Amos Diggory is so proud of his son. So proud of his son. Amos Diggory is not cool. He's not in a particularly prestigious position. I don't know if he's sporty, but he's not that well liked. And his son is a unicorn of a man, right? His son has been chosen a Hufflepuff for the Triwizard Tournament, who is just and fair and kind and good at the things that he does and very handsome and loved by the girls. Amos Diggory is so proud of his son. And when he passes Harry Potter, he says, not feeling so full of yourself now, are you? Now that Cedric's tied for first? Because the Daily Prophet has made it out as if Cedric is not a Triwizard champion at all. Cedric apologizes and is like, ignore my dad, sorry. He's been angry ever since that one article made it out to make it look like you were the only Hogwarts champion. Didn't bother to correct her though, did ya? Says Amos Diggory. I have to say, right, like it rubs Harry the wrong way, and when I was a child and reading the books, I was also a little bit frustrated by Amos blaming Harry for something that is Rita Skeeter's fault. But what I'm thinking about it now is from the perspective of a parent. And what would it be like, right, if we all had dads like Amos Diggory? Like I said, Harry is a war hero. He is the most famous person in their entire community. And Amos Diggory has the balls to walk up to him, loves his son so much that he's like, hey, you're stealing all the credit and my son deserves some. And I just think that's really cool. Mrs. Weasley defends Harry and says, you know Skeeter is always trying to mess things up. You work at the ministry. You understand that she does that. Eventually, Amos Diggory's wife lays a hand on his arm and they all walk away, and Harry gives Bill and Mrs. Weasley a tour of the grounds. Harry asks about Percy and they say he's not doing well. Apparently, there's been some confusion about the owls that Percy was receiving with instructions. Seems like maybe they weren't actually written by Barty Crouch, and Percy's being questioned himself by Cornelius Fudge. They return to the castle for lunch and they eat with Ron and Hermione, and Harry has to clarify that nothing was ever going on between him and Hermione, and then Mrs. Weasley is nice to Hermione again because she was giving her kind of the cold shoulder. Soon it's time and the champions have to follow Bagman to the stadium. The Weasleys and Hermione all wish their kids good luck, and Amos says goodbye to Cedric, and they all walk out the door. They arrive on the Quidditch pitch and there's a 20-foot high hedge maze that they're all made to enter. Hagrid, Moody, McGonagall, and Professor Flitwick are all wearing these big, these enormous red hats, and they will be wandering the outskirts of the hedges looking for red sparks. If the champions decide they can no longer compete, they can send red sparks into the air and they will be saved by emergency services ultimately. Good luck, Hagrid whispers to Harry. Tied in first place with 85 points each, Cedric Diggory and Harry Potter, both of Hogwarts School. He says, "On my mark, Harry and Cedric, 3, 2, 1, and they're off into the maze." The sound of the surrounding crowd immediately disappears as Harry walks into the maze. Initially, it starts to seem really easy because Harry doesn't come across anything that tries to hurt him for a really long time. He uses a compass spell with his wand to keep going north, but the lack of obstacles are starting to really unnerve him. Him and Cedric cross paths again, and Cedric says, "Don't go that way. The blast-ended scroots are that way." And Harry's like, great. And then they split up again. Soon, Harry is confronted by what he believes to be a Dementor, and so he practices a Patronus, but it doesn't really work. And he's like, wait a second, this is a boggart. Ridiculous. The boggart goes away. He walks even further through the maze, and all of a sudden, he hears Fleur scream. There's this chanted mist in front of him, but he thinks he needs to save Fleur, so he decides to run through it anyway, and the mist turns the whole world upside down, and all of a sudden, Harry seems to be hanging off the earth, and what you have to do, because it's just an illusion, is take a step forward, but it sure does feel like you're about to fall into the sky. Harry steps forward and is able to move forward, and the world immediately rights itself. Harry didn't see any sign of red sparks, so he hopes that means that Fleur is alright, but he's still looking for her. He says the cup is still out here, and it sounds like Fleur is no longer in the running. He does eventually run into the blast-ended Scroot, and they really have to have a sort of battle. Harry manages to use an impediment curse that he'd been practicing with Ron and Hermione, but it's bouncing off of the Scroot's hard shell, and so it's not until he gets basically under it, rather the Scroot gets on top of him, that he's able to use the spell, and it works. All of a sudden he hears Cedric's voice. "What are you doing? What the hell do you think you're doing?" And then Harry hears Crumb's voice. Crucio. The air is suddenly full of Cedric's yells. Harry begins sprinting toward the action. He sort of ineffectively cuts through the hedge maze by using the Reducto curse, and there he finds Cedric twitching on the floor with Crumb standing over him. Harry stupefies Crumb immediately and helps Cedric to his feet. Cedric's like, "Yeah, I don't believe it. I thought he was alright, but he just used an unforgivable curse on me," right? That could send Crumb to Azkaban. They're like, "Well, what should we do? Should we leave Crumb here?" Harry says, "No, we should send up some red spark." So now it's just Cedric and Harry. They go their separate ways again, and Harry runs into a Sphinx, and the Sphinx gives him a riddle, and if he can solve it, he gets to pass, but if he doesn't solve it, the Sphinx is going to attack him. And he manages to solve the riddle, and let me just read you the riddle right now. "First, think of the person who lives in disguise, who deals in secrets and tells not but lies. Next, tell me what's always the last thing to mend, the middle of middle and the end of end. And finally, give me the sound often heard during the search for a hard-to-find word. Now string them together and answer me this. Which creature would you be unwilling to kiss?" And Harry's like, "Could I have the riddle again, just more slowly this time?" The person who lives in disguise, who deals in secrets and tells not but lies, is a spy. The middle of middle and the end of end is the D. The sound often heard in a hard-to-find word was very hard for American children to guess because we say and but the word is written 100,000 times in this book, so the word is spider. And Harry guesses it because he's like, what wouldn't I want to kiss? A spider? It's like, okay, he gets it. I mean, hey. And he flies on through. He breaks into a run, and finally he gets to the center of the maze, and he sees there, gleaming in the middle, the Triwizard Cup. And suddenly, a dark figure hurtles out in the path in front of him, and it's Cedric. They're both running for the cup. But it looks like Cedric is going to get there first. Cedric is much taller and has longer legs. Then, Harry sees something moving over the hedge really quickly. Cedric, who's got his eye on the cup, hasn't seen it. "Cedric, on your left!" Cedric looks around just in time to hurl himself out of the way of the thing that was going to collide into it. It's a gigantic spider. Harry is trying to curse the spider, but it's so big that it's not having any effect on it. The spider comes for Harry, and it lifts Harry into the the air, it's pinched his leg with its pinchers, and he's in excruciating pain, just yelling stupefy over and over again. Eventually, he yells Expelliarmus, which is the first curse he ever learned. It's a disarming curse, and for some reason that works. So the spider drops Harry 12 feet onto his already injured leg, and the leg crumples beneath him. Cedric and him stupefy the spider at the same time, and that finally knocks it out. Cedric asks Harry if he's alright and if the spider fell on him, and Harry says no. He tries to get up, but his leg is shaking so badly that he can't put weight on it. Cedric is standing feet from the gleaming cup, and Harry says, go on then, take it, you're there. But Cedric doesn't move. He saw an expression of longing on Cedric's face. Cedric says, no, you take it. That's twice you've saved my neck in here. Harry says that's not how it's supposed to work. After all of his efforts, Cedric had beaten him to it. But it is true. Harry warned Cedric about the dragons. He saved Cedric from Crumb's Cruciatus curse. And he's just saved Cedric from the spider. Cedric says no. Stop being so noble, says Harry. Just take it. Then we can get out of here. You told me about the dragons. And you told me about the egg. We're square. I had help on the egg in the first place, says Cedric. You should have gotten the most points in the second task. I should have stayed behind to help the hostages. I don't know why I didn't do that. Harry says, I was the only one thick enough to think that the hostages were actually going to die. Just take the cup. No. He was walking away from the sword of glory that Hufflepuff House hadn't had in centuries. Go on, says Cedric. He looked as though this was costing him every ounce of resolution that he has. But his face was set. He seems decided. Finally, Harry says, both of us. We'll take it together. It's still a Hogwarts victory. We'll tie for it. Are you sure? Yeah. We've helped each other along the way. We couldn't have done it without one another. Let's just take it together. Cedric's face splits into a grin, and they take the cup. On 3, he and Cedric both grasp a handle, and then Harry feels a jerk somewhere behind his navel. His feet leave the ground, and the world is swirling colors all around him. Harry feels his feet slam into the ground. His injured leg gives way, and he falls forward. His hand had let go of the Triwizard Cup. Where are we? Cedric shook his head. They had left the Hogwarts grounds completely, obviously traveled miles, perhaps hundreds of miles. They were standing in a dark, overgrown graveyard. Did anyone tell you the cup was a portkey? Says Cedric. Is this supposed to be part of the task? Maybe we should take our wands out. Harry sees someone coming through the darkness, and he can tell by the way that they're walking that they're carrying something in their arms. The person is wearing a hooded cloak pulled over their head, and the thing in its arms looks like a baby. Maybe it's just a bundle of robes? They both turn to watch the approaching figure, and then, without warning, Harry's scar explodes into pain. He'd never felt a pain like this in all of his life. From far away, he hears a high, cold voice. Kill the spare. Avada Kedavra. A blast of green light, and then Harry hears something fall hard to the ground next to him. The pain in his scar reaches such a pitch that he retches. His eyes are closed, and when he does open his eyes, who he sees is Cedric Diggory, dead on the ground next to him. Because the entire book, the history that was available to you, you have been warned over and over again that children die in these games. Harry looks into Cedric's dead face. His eyes are blank. His mouth is open in surprise. Before Harry can accept what he's seeing or feel anything but numb disbelief, he's being pulled to his feet and tied to the grave of Tom Riddle, Lord Voldemort's father. And suddenly, Harry realizes who's under this hood. It's Wormtail. Harry is bound to this enormous grave, knots tightened around his limbs by Wormtail, whose life he had saved the year before. Cedric's body is lying some 20 feet away, and Harry can't bring himself to make a sound. His wand is on the ground next to Cedric's feet. Harry watches as Wormtail opens up this bundle. The pain in his scar flares once more. He looks down and sees a gigantic snake slithering through the grass by his feet. Circling the headstone where he's tied, Wormtail is pushing an enormous stone cauldron to the foot of the grave. He lights flames beneath it, and they start to crackle. The surface begins not only to bubble, but to send out fiery sparks. A high, cold voice says, "Hurry." Though Voldemort is the size of a child, no child alive has ever had a face like that. Flat and snake-like, gleaming red eyes. The thing seems almost helpless because it is. It raises its thin arms and puts them around Wormtail's neck, and as it does so, Wormtail's hood falls off, and Harry sees the look of revulsion on Wormtail's face. Wormtail carries the creature to the rim of the cauldron and dumps it in. Bone of the father, unknowingly given. You will renew your son. The gravestone that Harry is bound to cracks, and Harry watches as Wormtail pulls a bone out of the grave and puts it into the cauldron. Flesh of the servant willingly given. You will revive your master. And then he cuts off his own hand and puts it into the cauldron. Harry realized what Wormtail was about to do, and he closes his eyes right before Wormtail starts to scream. Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken. You will resurrect your foe. There's nothing that Harry can do to prevent it. Tied too tightly. He's struggling against the ropes that he's bound by while Wormtail comes at him with a dagger. He feels the point of the dagger penetrate his right arm, and blood starts seeping down his robes. Pours Harry's blood into the cauldron. A surge of white steam billows thickly over the top of the cauldron. From within the mist, Harry sees the outline of a man, tall and skeletally thin, rising slowly from inside the cauldron. "Robe me," says the voice. And Wormtail, still sobbing and moaning, picks black robes up from the ground and puts them around his master's shoulders. Harry stares into the face that has haunted his nightmare for years and years. Harry stares into the face of the murderer of his parents. Harry stares into the face of the murderer of Cedric Diggory and recognizes that Lord Voldemort has risen once again. Wormtail is currently crying and moaning on the ground, and Voldemort's first act with his wand is to pick Wormtail up and throw him against a headstone. He laughs this high, cold, mirthless laughter. "My lord, you promise," says Wormtail. "Hold out your arm," says Voldemort. And Wormtail extends his right arm, the stump of his right arm, and Voldemort says, "Your other arm, Wormtail." And Wormtail reveals his own dark mark on his forearm. Voldemort says, "It's clearly back. They all will have noticed it by now. Now we shall see who has remained loyal to me." He presses his white long forefinger to the mark on Wormtail's arm. Harry's scar burns, sears with pain, and Wormtail starts howling. He begins to pace up and down the graveyard, waiting to see who will be foolish enough to come and who will be foolish enough to stay away. Voldemort says, "You stand, Harry Potter, upon the remains of my late father, a muggle and a fool, very much like your dead mother," which is not true because Harry's mother is a witch. They both had their uses though, did they not? Your mother died to defend you, and I killed my father. See how useful he has proven himself in death. So Frank Bryce has lived in isolation his entire life because Voldemort murdered his dad and his grandparents. He tells the story of his parents. Voldemort says his mother was a witch who lived in this village and fell in love with the muggle who lived at the big house on the top of the hill. But his father abandoned her when he found out what she was. He didn't like magic, you see. And we'll get into that. That's one version of the story. Whatever. Voldemort's mother died giving birth to him, leaving him to be raised in a muggle orphanage. Then a young orphan child, Tom Riddle, vowed that he would revenge himself upon the fool that gave him his name. "But look, Harry," he says, "my true family returns just as Death Eaters in cloaks and masks start to show up in a circle around this graveyard." One of the Death Eaters falls to his knees and crawls toward Lord Voldemort and kisses the hem of his robes. The Death Eaters come and form a circle around Harry, Voldemort, Tom Riddle's grave, and a twitching and crying Wormtail. There are few gaps left in the circle. 13 years since we last met. We are all still united under the dark mark, or are we? I smell guilt, the stench of guilt. Voldemort reprimands all the Death Eaters for not trying to save him, for lying the way that they must have in order to not be in Azkaban right now, for renouncing their allegiance to Lord Voldemort when they thought he was dead. How could they be so foolish as to think that he would truly be bested by a baby? Some of the Death Eaters start begging for forgiveness, insisting that, "Master, they all need forgiveness. Forgive us all." Voldemort laughs and uses the Cruciatus curse on his supporters. So Harry's mother didn't just save the people that aren't supporters of Voldemort, she saved his supporters as well, because being in Voldemort's inner circle is not going to save you from strife, suffering, and pain. Harry is thinking, please let the police come, let anyone hear these shrieks and cries, but no one is on their way. Nobody knows that Harry is here. This has turned so quickly, and it is so jarring when you're reading it. Initially, as a reader, you might think that this is another task, but to know that no, we are in a graveyard, that Lord Voldemort's plan has worked, is so scary. Voldemort shouts at his supporters for a while, saying that they all returned out of fear, not really out of loyalty, and eventually he rewards Wormtail with a new shining silver hand, which at the time a lot of the fandom thought was going to be foreshadowing that Wormtail was going to kill Lupin, because, you know, silver traditionally harms werewolves. Voldemort approaches several of the Death Eaters and he reveals their name. Lucius Malfoy is standing in that graveyard, as are Crabbe and Goyle. He says, "You never tried to find me? Your exploits at the Quidditch World Cup were funny, I dare say, but might not your energies have been better directed somewhere else? I was constantly on alert, my lord. Had there been any signs of you, any whisper of your whereabouts, I would have been at your side immediately. And yet you ran from my mark." says Lord Voldemort, when my one faithful Death Eater did send it into the sky. I expect more faithful service in the future. Voldemort says, the Lestranges should be standing here, but they are currently entombed in Azkaban. When Azkaban is broken open, the Lestranges will be honored beyond their dreams. The Dementors will of course join us, as they are our natural allies. Death Eaters are in Azkaban, and Azkaban is guarded also by Voldy's supporters, so it's not great. Macnar is there, Buckbeak's would-be executioner. It's revealed that there are 6 missing Death Eaters. 3 dead in his service, 1 too cowardly to return, that's Karkaroff. 1 who he believes has left him forever, he will be killed, of course, and 1 who remains my most faithful servant at Hogwarts, and who has already re-entered my service. And that, of course, is the imposter playing Moody. And it was through his efforts that our young friend arrived here tonight. Harry Potter has kindly joined us for my rebirthing party. One might go so far as to call him my guest of honor. Lucius Malfoy begs Voldemort to tell him his story, and he says, I will. It begins and ends with my young friend here. You know, of course, that they have called this boy my downfall. His mother died in an attempt to save him, and unwittingly provided him with the protection that I admit I had not foreseen. I could not touch the boy. His mother left upon him traces of her sacrifice. This is old magic. I was foolish to overlook it. But no matter, I can touch him now. Harry felt the cold tip of Voldemort's long white finger on his body, and the pain bursts inside of him when Voldemort touches him. My curse was deflected by the woman's foolish sacrifice. Ah, pain beyond pain, my friends. Nothing could have prepared me for it. I was ripped from my body. I was less than spirit, less than the meanest ghost, but still I was alive. What I was, even I do not know. You know my goal. To conquer death. I remember forcing myself sleeplessly, endlessly, second by second to exist, and it's like, just die, man. Like, what the heck? Why? Like, being alive obviously isn't that awesome for you. Whatever. Voldemort says only one power remained to him, and he could possess the bodies of others. A wizard, young and foolish, wandered into the forest that he had made his home. He was easy to bend to his will. That's Professor Quirrell. And yet, Professor Quirrell was once again thwarted. I was thwarted by Harry Potter. And it's like so embarrassing for him to like lay this out like this. It's like, yeah, you were. The servant died when I left his body, and I was weak as I had ever been. I will not pretend that I did not fear that I might never regain my powers. It was my darkest hour. And yet, at last year, a servant returned to me. Wormtail here, who had faked his own death to escape justice, was driven out of hiding by those he had once counted friends. Scabbers was in their home for 12 years. He witnessed everything that happened in the Weasley home for 12 years. Like, that is such a crazy betrayal that we're just like not even addressing. After Wormtail was driven out by Sirius and Remus's knowledge of him, he goes out seeking Lord Voldemort, the only other person that can protect him. And I guess he was helped by other rats along the way. He unwisely at one point in time transformed and stopped at an inn for some food, where he ran into Bertha Jorkins, a witch from the Ministry of Magic. Now see the way fate favors Lord Voldemort. That might have been the end of Wormtail, and my last hope of regeneration. But Wormtail, displaying a presence of mind I would never have expected from him, convinced Bertha Jorkins to accompany him on a nighttime stroll. He overpowered her, we don't know what that means, and he brought her to me. With a little persuasion, torture was a goldmine of information. She told Voldemort about the Triwizard Tournament being held this year. She also told him about a faithful servant that would be all too willing to help him if he was freed. So Frank Bryce, Bertha Jorkins, and Cedric Diggory are the first 3 deaths of this war. Wormtail was able to follow the instructions that Voldemort had given him. A spell or 2 of his own invention allowed him to create a sort of baby snake body out of Nagini's old shedding, and then this spell to regenerate him. He wanted Harry Potter's blood, not any witch or wizard's blood. He wanted Harry Potter's blood in his veins. That way, the protection that his mother had died for would now exist within Voldemort too. And it does. It's horrible. The faithful servants stationed at Hogwarts ensured that Harry's name would be put into the Goblet of Fire, ensured that Harry would have the best chance at touching the Triwizard Cup, and turn the cup into a portkey to bring him to this graveyard tonight. I want there to be no misunderstanding in anyone's mind. Harry Potter escaped me merely by lucky chance, and I will prove that to you tonight. He's going to challenge 14-year-old Harry to a duel. Harry has never dueled before except in the one class, and Lockhart taught it, and all he learned was Expelliarmus. Voldemort says, untie him, Wormtail, and give him him back his wand. Wormtail roughly thrusts Harry's wand back into his hand without making his eye because Wormtail knows that he owes Harry. "We bow to each other, Harry," says Voldemort, and when Harry refuses to bow, Voldemort makes Harry's body bend to its will. And now we duel. Voldemort immediately hits Harry with the Cruciatus Curse. The pain is so intense and all-consuming. White-hot knives feel like they're stabbing into every area of Harry's skin. He's screaming, louder than he's ever screamed in his life, and then it stops. Harry believes that Voldemort is going to kill him in this moment. He sees no way out, and he knows that he's going to die just as Cedric has died. But if these are his last moments, he's not going to play along. Voldemort puts the Imperious Curse on Harry, but Harry's able to throw it off because of Voldemort's faithful servant at Hogwarts. Voldemort is about to cast the Cruciatus Curse on Harry one more time, but using his Quidditch reflexes, Harry is able to hide behind a grave. "Does this mean you're tired of our duel? Okay, come out here and I'll kill you." Harry decides he's not going to die crouching behind this grave like he's playing hide and seek, and so he stands up, and one of the most powerful and certainly the most cruel wizard in the world duels 14-year-old Harry in an Albanian graveyard. Voldemort cries Avada Kedavra, and Harry shoots off Expelliarmus, and the two wands, their spells connect mid-air. This golden thread connects the two wands, and all of the sudden these beams of light shoot out all over them and form a sort of golden cage around Voldemort and Harry. They lift the two of them up and move them away outside of the circle of Death Eaters. "Do nothing!" shrieks Voldemort. This was not what was supposed to happen. He has to tell his goons, his freaking lackeys, that he doesn't need help with this 14-year-old kid. Then a beautiful and unearthly sound starts to fill the air. It's coming from every thread of light-spun energy around him and Voldemort. It's the sound of hope to Harry. He felt as though the song were inside of him and not just around him. "Don't break the connection," he hears. But it was no sooner that he thought it that it became harder to do. This bead of light starts moving back and forth between the two casters' wands. The direction of the beam is now moving toward him from Voldemort, and he feels his wand shudder. But then Harry is able to push with force of mind, will, and powerful magic the bead of light all the way toward Voldemort's wand. And when it connects with Voldemort's wand, he hears the Phoenix song. Voldemort's wand is vibrating extra hard, and Voldemort looks astonished. When the bead of light connects with Voldemort's wand, his wand begins to emit sounds of pain. Voldemort's eyes widen in shock as out of his wand comes the wisps, the essence, the ghost of the hand that he had made for Wormtail. And then, out of his wand, comes the body and the face of Cedric Diggory. The essence of Cedric Diggory, the soul of Cedric Diggory, pulls himself out of Voldemort's wand and tells Harry to hold on. His voice is distant and echoing, and there's a lot of soul work in all of these books, but I sort of remove it from religion. I imagine that soul work is really about essence. It's about the mind versus body conversation that a lot of philosophers have. The question of whether or not our thoughts come from simply synapses firing in our brain, or whether or not there's something more. I think, therefore I am. Who am I outside of this shell? So the essence of Cedric is there, and then suddenly another person comes out of Voldemort's wand. It's Frank Bryce. Frank says, "So he's a real wizard then. Killed me, that one did," and stands next to Cedric. Bertha Jorkins comes out. "Don't let him go, Harry. Don't let go." Harry knows what's going to come next, and soon a woman drops to the ground, and it's Harry's mom. She says, "Your father's coming. He's coming next. Hold on." And then, tall and untidied haired, just like Harry, the smoky, shadowy form of James Potter blossoms from the end of Voldemort's wand. Harry is surrounded by his parents and the other victims of Lord Voldemort, and he is terrified. When the connection is broken, they tell him, we will linger and distract him. What you need to do is get to the cup. It's a portkey, and it will return you to Hogwarts. Do you understand? Harry says yes, fully expecting to meet his death. "Harry," whispers Cedric, "please take my body back to my parents." "I will," says Harry. "Do it now," says his father's voice. "Run." Harry yells now and breaks the connection and runs for the portkey. The cage of light vanishes, and Voldemort's victims start to close in upon him. Harry runs as he has never run in his life, knocking two stunned Death Eaters out of the way. He zigs and zags between headstones, trying to find his way to the portkey. Harry makes his way to Cedric's body, and he grabs his arm. He screams "Accio" and pulls the cup toward him. All he hears is Voldemort's screams of fury as he is pulled back by the portkey onto the grounds of Hogwarts. Harry feels himself fall flat on the ground in front of the entire school. He doesn't move as the smell of grass fills his nostrils. He can't let go of the two things that he's clutching, the smooth cold handle of the Triwizard Cup and Cedric's body. He feels as though he'll slide away into blackness if he lets go of either of them. A torrent of sound is deafening around him. Then a pair of hands seize him and turn him toward him. He's looking up at Albus Dumbledore. He lets go of the cup, but he won't let go of Cedric. He's back. The face of Cornelius Fudge appears above Harry. Diggory! Dumbledore! He's dead! Amos Diggory starts running toward them. And can you imagine, Amos Diggory sees his son arrive with Harry Potter, thinking that maybe his son has won glory for Hufflepuff House, and then to find him dead. It's unbelievable. Cedric Diggory was a really good guy who believed in doing things right and believed in justice and hard work and fairness. And he might have gone on to do really good things. And he might have gone on to raise really good children who went on to do further good things. Harry, let go of him, says Fudge. He wanted me to bring him back. He wanted me to bring him back to his parents. That's all right, Harry, just let go. Dumbledore bends down and picks Harry up and sets him on his feet. Dumbledore, Amos Diggory's running toward us. Don't you think you should tell him before he sees? Harry, stay here, says Dumbledore. Girls start screaming. Everyone's sobbing hysterically. It looks like Harry has killed Cedric. Someone starts pulling Harry away from the commotion. It's all right, Sonny, taking you to the hospital wing. Someone larger and stronger than him is half pulling, half carrying him away from the frightened crowd. What happened? The man asks. And all of a sudden he registers the clunk, clunk, clunk of Moody's clawed foot. Took me and Cedric to a graveyard, and Voldemort was there, Lord Voldemort. Killed Cedric. They killed Cedric. Made a potion, got his body back. The Dark Lord got his body back, he's returned, got my wand, did something funny. You dueled with the Dark Lord? I saw my mom and dad, they came out. I need to know exactly what happened. Moody tips something down Harry's throat. He coughed, a peppery taste burning his throat. What did the Dark Lord take from you, says Moody. And the Death Eaters, they returned? Yes, says Harry, loads of them. How did he treat them, says Moody. Did he forgive them? Harry says suddenly, I have to tell Dumbledore, there's a Death Eater at Hogwarts. There's a Death Eater here, he put my name in the Goblet of Fire, and he made sure I got through to the end. I know who the Death Eater is, says Moody quietly. It was I who did all of that. Harry hears it but doesn't believe it. No, you didn't. I assure you I did, says Moody. He forgave them then, the Death Eaters. Who went free? The ones who escaped Azkaban? Those treacherous cowards who wouldn't even brave Azkaban for him? The faithless, worthless bits of filth who were brave enough to cavort en masse at the Quidditch World Cup, but fled at the sight of the dark mark I conjured in the sky. You fired the What? I told you, Harry, I told you, if there's one thing I hate, it's a Death Eater that walked free. I expected him to torture them. Tell me he hurt them, Harry. Moody's face is suddenly lit with an insane smile. After all, I did. Who put your name in the Goblet of Fire under a different school? I did. Who nudged Hagrid to tell you about the dragons? I did. I had to use every ounce of cunning available to me to make sure that my hand was not detectable in your success. As long as you got to that maze, preferably with a decent head start, then I knew I would have a chance to get rid of the other champions, leaving your way clear. But I also had to contend with your stupidity. The second task. I knew you hadn't worked out the egg's clue, so I had to give you another hint. Who do you think told Cedric to open it underwater? Decent people are so easy to manipulate, Potter. Who do you think made sure that the elf was listening when I told McGonagall that you'd need gillyweed? I figured you'd get the information from Longbottom. I gave him the book, Magical Water Plants of the Mediterranean, but you didn't even ask him. All you'd have to do was ask, and Longbottom would have been able to tell you gillyweed, but you didn't even ask. Your streak of pride and independence may have ruined it all. But luckily, Dumbledore took your idiocy for nobility and marked you high for it so I could breathe again. I cursed as many obstacles out of the way in the maze as I could. I stunned Fleur Delacour as she passed. I put the Imperious Curse on Crumb so that he would take out Diggory, and that should have left your path clear to the cup. Harry cannot understand how Dumbledore's friend, the famous Auror, Moody, is responsible for this. It made no sense at all. Imagine how he will reward me when he finds out all that I have done. I will be his dearest, closest supporter, closer than a son. The Dark Lord and I, said Moody, both of us had very disappointing fathers. Very disappointing indeed. Both of us suffered the indignity, Harry, of sharing our father's name. And yet, both of us had the pleasure, the very great pleasure, of killing our fathers to ensure the continued rise of the Dark Order. He is back, Harry Potter. You did not conquer him, and now I am here to conquer you. At that moment, Moody is thrown backwards into his office and someone yells stupefy. Dumbledore, Snape, and McGonagall have arrived to save Harry from Moody, or the Moody imposter. The look on Dumbledore's face as he stared down at who looks like Mad-Eye Moody was more terrible than anything Harry could have imagined. A power is radiating from Dumbledore. McGonagall tries to take Harry to the hospital wing. No, says Dumbledore. I need him here. Understanding is the first step to acceptance, says Dumbledore, and only with acceptance can there be recovery. This is not Alastor Moody, says Dumbledore. You have never known Alastor Moody, and Moody would never have removed you from my sight tonight after I asked you to stay put. Severus, please fetch me the strongest truth potion you have. and then go down to the kitchens and get a house elf called Winky. Minerva, kindly go down to Hagrid's cabin. In it, you will find a large black dog. Please bring that black dog to the hospital wing. Dumbledore opens all these trunks in Moody's office and eventually finds the real Mad-Eye Moody at the bottom of a long, undetectable cave-like situation, and he's missing a huge chunk of his hair because it is revealed that Barty Crouch Jr. is alive and has been playing Mad-Eye Moody for the entire year. He's had to drink Polyjuice Potion every hour on the hour to maintain his mask of Moody. He stole Mad-Eye Moody's magical eye and has been taking out chunks of his hair to make the Polyjuice Potion over and over again. That's why Barty Crouch Jr. was in Snape's office in the middle of the night. He was stealing Boomslang's skin for his Polyjuice Potion. Suddenly, Moody's face begins to morph and change into that of Barty Crouch Jr. Barty Crouch Jr. is given Veritas Serum and he explains. He's familiar with Polyjuice Potion because, after his father sentenced him to a life in Azkaban, his mother found out that she had a terminal illness, and so it was her mother's dying wish that the two would swap places. Barty Crouch, on that deathbed visit, replaced his dying wife to take his son out of Azkaban. Both them took Polyjuice Potion and they switched places. The Barty Crouch Jr. that died in Azkaban was actually Barty Crouch's mother, and Barty Crouch takes his degenerate son home with him and stages a funeral for his dead wife. The Dementors didn't notice. They sensed a healthy person and a dying person entering Azkaban and a healthy person and a dying person leaving Azkaban. Barty Crouch had to keep his son under the Imperius Curse over the last 13 years to keep his son from escaping and looking for the Dark Lord. Barty Crouch Jr. says he was forced by his father to wear an invisibility cloak day and night. His only companion was Winky. But one day, Bertha Jorkins, used to work for Barty Crouch, came to the house and heard Winky talking to him. She discovered that Barty Crouch Jr. was not only alive, but being kept in Crouch's house. Barty Crouch is forced to put a very powerful memory on Bertha Jorkins so that she doesn't incriminate him. Winky apparently talked Barty Crouch into letting Barty Crouch Jr. go to the Quidditch World Cup, and the reason she was saving a seat for Barty Crouch was because Barty Crouch Jr. was under an invisibility cloak. Barty Crouch Jr. loved Quidditch, and so Winky thought it would be a nice treat for him. He hadn't been out in 13 years. Barty Crouch Jr. found himself for the first time out in public, and right in front of him was a boy whose wand was sticking out of his pocket, and he snatched it. He snatched Harry Potter's wand. Then, when him and Winky go back to the tent, he hears the Death Eaters chanting, the ones who aren't in Azkaban, and he's so angry that they're not in Azkaban, despite the fact that he is not in Azkaban himself, despite the fact that Barty Crouch Jr. has not faced justice, because he's been saved by both of his parents, and he clearly should not have been. Those Death Eaters were not enslaved as Barty Crouch felt he was under the Imperius Curse, and it was his anger with them, it was hearing what they were chanting, that led him to break free of the Imperius Curse, to cast the Dark Mark into the sky, and to stow away and be reunited with his former master once more. When Barty Crouch recognized Winky stunned at the scene of the crime, he went into the bushes and found his son under an invisibility cloak. He tried to rein his son in from that point on, but the damage had been done. Since Winky had failed father, he dismissed her, and now it was just father and I alone in the house. And there's something so tragic, right, about Barty Crouch pursuing justice his entire life, and then his wife's deathbed wish being for her to die alone in a prison and to take back their son, and then just having to exist, to isolate himself from everyone he knows and loves, because he has to hide his degenerate son. Just the two of him, holding him mentally captive, feeding him, making sure he's clothed and washed. Like, can you imagine what it would have felt like inside of that house for 12 years? It must have been really, really dark. But now it was just Crouch and Crouch Jr. in the house when Voldemort, he arrives at the house saying that he had found Bertha Jorkins, the only other person that knew Barty Crouch Jr. was alive. He had tortured her until all the information broke out of her. He arrives at Crouch's house near midnight, and his father answers the door. It was very quick. Barty Crouch is immediately placed under the Imperius Curse, and suddenly Barty Crouch Jr.'s father is the one that's imprisoned, controlled. Voldemort asks Barty Crouch Jr. to risk everything to earn his favor, and Barty Crouch Jr. is ready. On the night before school starts, they attack Mad-Eye Moody, and they get him. And Barty Crouch Jr. since then has been acting as Mad-Eye Moody in Hogwarts and otherwise. Wormtail had returned to the care of Voldemort and was supposed to be watching Barty Crouch Jr., but he messed up one day. He accidentally let Crouch slip, which was when Harry and Crumb found him on the edge of the woods. Barty Crouch, when he was urgently telling Harry that he had emergency information for Dumbledore, was going to tell him that his son was alive and that Voldemort was alive. Crouch says he used the map that he had taken from Harry Potter, And Barty Crouch Jr. killed his own father there at the edge of the wood. He transfigured his father's body into a bone, and then he buried it while wearing an invisibility cloak and freshly dug earth outside of Hagrid's cabin. I offered to carry the Triwizard Cup into the maze before dinner. I turned it into a portkey, and my plan worked. He has returned to power, and I will be honored by him, beyond the dream of wizards. An insane smile is on his face, and Winky is wailing at his side. Dumbledore binds Barty Crouch Jr. and tells Minerva McGonagall to watch over him while he takes Harry to the hospital wing. Before they go to the hospital wing, Dumbledore makes Harry come to his office and recount the whole story to him, which Harry very much does not want to do. Sirius puts a hand on Harry's shoulder and says, "We don't have to recount this tonight, do we?" And Dumbledore says, "Unfortunately, we do." Fawkes also comes to Harry's side. "You have shown bravery beyond anything that I could have expected of you. I ask you to demonstrate courage one more time. I ask you to tell me what happened." The Phoenix lets out a note of song, and it drops a teardrop onto Harry, and he starts to heal. It warms him, it strengthens him. He tells them everything about the cup, about the graveyard, about Cedric, about Wormtail, about the blood used to regenerate Voldemort, about all the Death Eaters that came to the clearing, about the duel, and about his parents. When he tells Dumbledore that it was his blood used to regenerate Voldemort, he thinks he sees a look of triumph in Dumbledore's eyes, but then it disappears, because this is contingency plan A for Dumbledore. All of this has been horrific, but it is in line with the plan. Dumbledore says that the reason their wands were able to connect is because they share cords. Each of them contains the feather from a phoenix. This phoenix, Fawkes. They won't work properly against one another. If the owners of the wands do decide to battle, a very rare effect will take place. One of the wands will force the other to regurgitate the spells it has performed, which means that Harry must have seen a shadow of the living Cedric emerge from the wand. An echo. Harry says he saw Bertha Jorkins and an old man, and then eventually his parents. When the book was initially released, it had a misprint, and it had Harry's father coming out of the wand first and saying, "Wait for your mother," and that was very confusing and a huge mistake because this is really central to the plot. So the next time that you make a mistake and you feel like shit about yourself, just remember that at least you didn't do this. This was a much anticipated book, and to have this, a really core central thing, be messed up and distributed to a bunch of readers and not necessarily super fixable right away, at least you didn't do that, right? Could have been worse. After Harry recounts his story, Dumbledore tells him that he has shown bravery equal to those who died fighting Voldemort in the past. You have shouldered a grown wizard's burden and found yourself equal to it. And you have given us all more than what we had any right to expect. Sirius turns into a black dog, and they all go to the hospital wing where they run into the Weasleys. The Weasleys definitely want to know what happened, but Dumbledore protects Harry and says, "I ask that you don't ask him any questions tonight." He says, "Madame Pomfrey, this dog will be remaining with Harry. I assure you, he's extremely well trained. Harry, I will wait until you get into bed." Dumbledore says he'll come back as soon as he's met with Cornelius Fudge. The real Moody is lying motionless on a hospital bed next to Harry, and Harry asks if he's okay. Madame Pomfrey says he will be. "I'm all right," he tells the Weasleys. "Just tired." And Mrs. Weasley's eyes fill with tears. They give Harry a sleeping potion, and he drops off to sleep. Soon he's woken up by Fudge's voice and McGonagall's voice. "Regrettable, but all the same, Minerva," Cornelius is saying. McGonagall says you should never have brought them into this castle. Dumbledore sweeps into the room and says, "Minerva, I'm surprised to see you here. I asked you to watch over Barty Crouch." And she says, "Unfortunately, that's no longer necessary. When I told the minister that we had found the Death Eater responsible, he insisted on a Dementor accompanying him to question the suspect. When the Dementor came into the room, it immediately administered the kiss of death. So now we will no longer be able to hear Barty Crouch's testimony." Fudge says, "By all accounts, it's no loss. He's responsible for several deaths." Dumbledore says he cannot give evidence about why he killed those people. "What do you mean why he killed those people? He was a raving lunatic. From what Minerva and Severus have told me, he seems to have thought he was doing it all on you-know-who's bidding." "Lord Voldemort was giving him instructions," says Dumbledore. "The plan succeeded. Voldemort has been restored to his body." Fudge looks as though someone has just hit him in the face. "You-know-who returned? Preposterous." "Come on now, Dumbledore." "Under the influence of Veritaserum, he told us exactly why things had happened that way. He was smuggled out of Azkaban, and how Voldemort learned of his continued existence." "See here," says Fudge. "You can't seriously believe that you-know-who has returned from the dead. Crouch may have believed that's why he was doing the things that he was doing, but on the word of a lunatic like that, Dumbledore, I can't believe you buy that. When Harry touched the Triwizard Cup, he was transported straight to Voldemort, and I cannot allow you to question Harry tonight, but he witnessed Lord Voldemort's rebirth." Fudge says, "Are you really prepared to take the word of Like Harry's word on this? Really, Dumbledore? Certainly I believe Harry, says Dumbledore. I heard Crouch's confession myself, and I heard Harry's account of what happened. The two stories make sense and explain everything, including Bertha Jorkin's disappearance. Fudge is still smiling while Dumbledore is saying all of this. You are prepared to believe that Lord Voldemort has returned on the word of a lunatic and a boy who... Well, Fudge looks at Harry. You've been reading Rita Skeeter, Mr. Fudge. And if I have, he says to Dumbledore, a parcel mouth, and having funny turns all over the place, like, do we really think he's the most reliable narrator? And so my question is, Fudge refuses to believe that Voldemort has returned. That must mean, right, that he thinks that Harry killed Cedric, right? Harry says, I saw the Death Eaters. I can give you their names. Lucius Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, Macnair. Meanwhile, Fudge is like, very old families, lots of donations. Also cleared, now working for the Ministry. Avery, Knott, Crabbe, Goyle. You're merely repeating the names of those who were tried 13 years ago. You could have found those in old reports or records. This doesn't mean anything. The boy was full of some crackpot story at the end of last year too, right? His tales are getting too hard to believe. Fudge says, it seems to me that you are determined to start a panic that I cannot condone. Harry couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had always assumed that Fudge was a kindly figure, a little blustering, a little pompous, but essentially good-natured. But now, a short, angry wizard was standing before him, refusing point blank to see the evidence in front of his eyes, refusing to accept the prospect that his comfortable world had been disordered, to believe that Voldemort could have risen. Voldemort has returned, says Dumbledore. Preposterous, says Fudge again. Dumbledore says, I suggest you remove the Dementors from Azkaban immediately. Preposterous. Remove the Dementors? I'd be kicked out of office for suggesting it. The rest of us will sleep less soundly in our beds, Cornelius, knowing that you have put Lord Voldemort's most dangerous allies in the care of creatures who will join him as soon as given the chance. They will not remain loyal to you, Fudge. Fudge is like, this is ridiculous. Dumbledore says, I also suggest you send an envoy to the Giants. Envoy to the Giants? Extend to them a hand of friendship before it is too late, or Voldemort will persuade them, as he did last time, that he alone among wizards will give them their freedom. If the magical community got wind that I was trying to start a friendship with the Giants, Dumbledore, it would end my career. You are blinded, said Dumbledore. You place too much importance, as you always have done, on the purity of blood. You fail to recognize that it matters not where or how someone is born, but who they grow to be. I tell you now, take the steps that I have suggested, and you will be remembered as one of the greatest and bravest ministers of magic in history. Fail to act, and history will remember you as a man who stepped aside and allowed Voldemort a second chance to destroy the world we have tried so hard to rebuild. Insane, says Fudge. Mad. The Weasleys are all standing overhearing this conversation. They have just been told that their world is no longer safe, that the most dangerous murderer in their entire history has risen again and fought Harry tonight. If your determination to shut your eyes will carry you as far as this, Cornelius, then we have reached a parting of ways. You must act as you see fit, and I as I see fit. Dumbledore's voice carries no hint of threat, but it's clear that Fudge takes it that way. I've always given you free rein, he says. I've had a lot of respect for you. I might not have agreed with some of your decisions, but I kept quiet. But if you're going to work against me, the only one whom I work against is Voldemort, says Dumbledore. If you are against him, then we are on the same side. He can't be back, Dumbledore. Can't be. Snape strides forward and pulls up his robe and reveals the dark mark on his left forearm. It's not as clear as it was an hour ago when it burned black, but you can see it. Every Death Eater had that sign burned into him by Lord Voldemort. It's our means of distinguishing one another and his means of summoning us. Why do you think Karkaroff fled tonight? We both felt the mark burn. We both knew he had returned. Fudge snaps back from Snape. He's shaking his head. I don't know what your staff are playing at, Dumbledore, but I think I've heard enough. I have no more to add. He says your winnings and drops 1,000 galleons on Harry's bed. There should have been a presentation ceremony, but under the circumstances. And then the Minister of Magic flees. Dumbledore tells Bill to send a message to Arthur. All those that can be persuaded of the truth must be notified that the Dark Lord has returned. Dumbledore sends McGonagall for Hagrid and Madame Maxime if she'll consent to come. He sends Madame Pomfrey to go check on Winky, who is probably in considerable distress. And now, he says, it's time for 2 of our number to recognize each other for what they are. Sirius, if you could resume your usual form. Great Black Dog looks at Dumbledore and then transforms back into Sirius Black in front of Snape. The look on Snape's face is one of mingled horror and fury. He's here at my invitation, says Dumbledore. As are you, Severus. I trust you both. It's time for you to lay aside your old differences and trust each other. I will settle in the short term for a handshake. You're on the same side now. They shake each other's hands and they let go extremely quickly. Fudge's attitude, though not unexpected, changes everything. Sirius, I need you to set off at once. You are to alert Remus Lupin, Arabella Figg, Mundungus Fletcher, the old crowd. Lie low at Remus's. There was a lot of fandom conversation around Remus and Sirius's potential love story, and so this line, Dumbledore saying go lie low at Remus's, implied to the fandom that yes, they are actually together, but that's not apparently what it was. Sirius tells Harry that he'll see him very soon, and then he sets off. Dumbledore says, Severus, you know what I must ask you to do, and if you are prepared, now is the time. Snape says I am. He looks paler than usual, and he goes. Dumbledore wishes him luck. I must see the Diggories, says Dumbledore. Take the rest of your potion. I'll see you all later. Harry, Ron, and Mrs. Weasley are all looking at him. None of them speaks for a very long time. You've got to take the rest of your potion, Harry, says Molly. You have a good long sweep, and think about what you're going to do with your winnings. I don't want that gold. Anyone can have it. I shouldn't have won it. It was Cedric's. It wasn't your fault, Harry. I told him to take the cup with me, says Harry. There's a burning feeling in his throat. Mrs. Weasley bends down and she hugs Harry, and this is the first hug that Harry's ever had from a mom. He had no memory of ever being hugged like this. Full weight of everything that happened that night falls on him. His mother's face, his father's voice, Cedric. Harry drinks the potion down in one gulp, and he falls asleep. Chapter 37 is called The Beginning. Harry has to meet with the Diggories the next morning. They did not blame him for what happened. Mr. Diggory sobbed through most of the meeting, and Mrs. Diggory's grief seems beyond tears. He suffered very little then, she says. After all, Amos, he died just after he won the tournament. He must have been happy. When they get to their feet, Mrs. Diggory says, look after yourself now. Harry tries to give them the sack of gold, but they won't take it. It's yours, dear. I couldn't. The leaving feast is usually cause for celebration. Tonight, however, there are black drapes all around the dining hall. The end of another year. Dumbledore's eyes fall upon the Hufflepuff table, the most subdued table. They have the saddest and palest faces in the crowd. I must first acknowledge the loss of a very fine person who should be sitting here, enjoying our feast with us. I would like you all, please, to stand and raise your glasses to Cedric Diggory. Cedric was a person who exemplified many of the qualities that distinguish Hufflepuff House. He was a good and loyal friend, a hard worker. He valued fair play. His death has affected you all, whether you knew him well or not. I think you have a right, therefore, to know how he died. Cedric Diggory was murdered by Lord Voldemort. The hall erupts in sounds of disbelief. The Ministry of Magic does not wish me to tell you this information. It is my belief, however, that the truth is generally preferable to lies, and any attempt to pretend that Cedric died as the result of an accident or some sort of blunder is an insult to his memory. There is someone else who must be mentioned as it relates to Cedric's death. That person is, of course, Harry Potter. He risked his own life to return Cedric's body to Hogwarts. He showed, in every respect, the sort of bravery that few wizards have ever shown facing Lord Voldemort, and for this, I honor him. They raise their glasses to Harry Potter. The Triwizard Tournament's aim was to promote further relationships and magical understanding between countries. Such ties are more important than ever. He says every guest in this hall, motioning to the Durmstrang students and the Beauxbatons, will be welcome back at Hogwarts forever. We are only as strong united as we are divided. It is my belief that we are facing dark and difficult times ahead. Remember, Cedric. Remember, if the time should come when you have to make a choice between what is right and what is easy. Remember what happened to a boy who was good, who was kind, and brave, because he strayed the path of Lord Voldemort. Remember Cedric Diggory. Harry packs his trunk, Hedwig's back in her cage. They say goodbye to the Beauxbatons and the Durmstrangs. Fleur says she hopes to see Harry again. Crumb comes to say goodbye to Hermione, and he asks for a private word. Crumb eventually shakes Harry's hand and says that he liked Diggory. He was always kind to him, always. Ron, having some internal battle, bursts out, "Can I have your autograph?" And Crumb, looking surprised but gratified, signs a fragment of parchment for Ron. Harry feels that Dumbledore's leaving speech had unblocked him, and it's easier to talk about what had happened now. On the train back to the Dursleys, Harry is approached by Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, who he has new information about now. He understands that they are definitely from dark wizarding families. Malfoy is bullying Harry and telling him that I told you you should have chose your friends more wisely, but instead you chose mudbloods, and Fred and George hex all of them at the same time. When they get off the train, before he can rejoin the Dursleys, he gives his Triwizard winnings to Fred and George, tells them to do whatever they want with it, start their joke shop, but definitely buy Ron a pair of new dress robes. Harry says goodbye to the people that love him and walks toward the Dursleys, and he thinks about what Hagrid has said. What's coming will come, and we'll meet it when it does. My name is Sage. Thank you so much for watching.